And welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And today I'm having a chat with Ralph Ellis on some of his theories and hypotheses about the ancient world that are alternative compared to mainstream. And we're just going to dig into them and just sort of test these out and see if see if you can convince me or let's do this. Let's do this thing. Before we
Yes.
start, we're just gonna have some fun. That's all. Before we start, and I've read some of your books, and they're interesting. They're very well written. I think you have a very creative mind. I think you're like me. You love history. You just love to test things out and find secrets and discover things that no one else has discovered. I get it. I get it, and I respect that. But before we start, I want to throw something at you real quick. And so I've recently come across this old kingdom pharaoh named Asessi, Jedikari Asessi, right? Can you guys see this? Is this art?
Yeah, what dynasty is that?
This is from the 5th dynasty, right?
Fifth, quite early, yeah.
Yeah. And so his name right away, you're like, oh, it looks like Jesus, right? Someone might say that. But what's even funnier about this is he has a son named Asasi Ankh, which means Asasi lives. It's got the name has got the little, so a lot of people like to think that the Ankh is like a precursor to the Christian cross. And it's like, okay, that's interesting too. Well, his mother's name is Marisank. Oh wow, looks like Mary, right? And so you can sort of, it's weird because you can almost make this weird argument that what if there was a Jesus before the Jesus that no one knows about, and this is all based off this. Now I don't think this at all, but what I'm trying to show is he has a daughter named Maret Essie, beloved by Asessi. And so the crazy thing about it is he had a funerary cult named after him for 200 years. So if you actually look down to funerary cult, where is it? He was the object of a funerary cult established of his death, lasted to the Old Kingdom for 200 years. And so the walls of his tombs have Ra desires that Asessi lives. Asessi, perfect emulation of Asessi. Make Asessi live. It almost sounds like Jesus lives, right? Now, the reason why I'm pointing all this out is not to, is just to show how easy it is. It's so easy to look at history and try to make connections where they might not be. That's all. I'm just pointing that out there. Now, you could take that as you will, but let's get into some of your. I just wanted to just preface it with that because, like, I don't know if this is the evidence behind this is just zilch. It's just a name. I'm looking at a name, and he even has a believe it or not, he has a vizier named Ptah. And you could say, oh, Jesus had a vizier named Peter. And like, it's just, there's so many connections that I can just sort of fit, and I can just sort of draw my own puzzle pieces and just put them out.
There is a link there, of course, because Ptah is the god of masonry, and that is where Peter was named from, because he is Peter the Stone.
So did I just
so it's from the same tradition, yes.
So did I just convince you that this is the real Jesus?
No, I mean, what you need to do when you're making these connections is you need multiple connections. You can't go on a single name. And none of the connections I have made have ever been on a single name. Okay. Normally, I get something like 6, 10, 12 of different connections with the same character before I assert that these characters are linked in some fashion. So you've got to have multiple connections, preferably not with just multiple names, but with multiple attributes of that person.
Let me tell you this.
Then you can start to think that this is the same person. I mean, look at what I did with the Solomon character.
Right. Let me stop you right there. Let me just stop you right there. Asessi, this pharaoh, had a funerary cult that was based on the afterlife, salvation, believing in it was like your son becomes your incarnation of you. It was a Osiris Horus type of theology, and they were this was named he has his own pyramid, giant pyramid. He has one now. So the attributes, you know, you have somebody who is supposed to live after he was dead. They're saying Asessi lives. So you can sort of, I can mold it that way. The point is, it's like, then how do you get to the point where why the point is, what I'm getting at is, what's the motive for Christians later on to cover this up and say this is the real one, but we're going to make a new one, and we're going to make him crucified in 33 AD by Pontius Pilate? Like, what would be the point of that? You know what I'm saying? What would be
Well, these royal families did copy each other down the millennia, of course, because they were guided by history and molded by history, and so they would repeat what had happened in the past. I mean, remember, the Edessan king we were talking about is called Manu. Now, are we talking about reusing the old Egyptian name for the first pharaoh in Egypt, who was also called Mani or Manu? Are they reusing these names down the centuries, down the millennia? It's quite possible, if they knew that this was their history, that they would reuse that history. And that's quite possibly what they've done. So you might get repetitions of these similar names and similar attributes down the millennia. It's quite possible.
We have a super chat, and I was thinking about asking you this anyway, but somebody already popped it up with it and says, why do you call him Isis if his name is Izates? He's talking about, because for anyone who doesn't know, this is the king of Edessa that you think is the historical Jesus. We're gonna get. I really want to dig into this. Like, I want to go deep into this, and I'll be nice. I'm not gonna try to. I really want. I want to learn. I want to learn. I do want to learn. So again, that's the question, though. So you want to answer
that? Because Josephus calls him Isis. So yes, his name is Isates. That's his royal name. But Josephus gives him a nickname, as Josephus often does, and his nickname is Isis. You will not get that. You will not get that from the English.
Can I ask you what chapter that is? It's in Josephus, you said?
Yeah, it's in the works of Josephus. Now, you have to look at it in the Greek, because it will not give you that in the translation. In the translation, he's always called Isates. But if you look in the original Greek, he's actually called Isis on 2 or 3 occasions. So, I mean, that's where that came from. So, I mean, I don't make things up in my books. This is exactly.
I'm not saying that. So
this is exactly what it says in the original book, and it's just interesting because, of course, that may well be the original name for Jesus, because in the East, well, in the Greek, he's called Eusus, which doesn't sound like Joshua or Yeshua very much at all. And of course, in the East, he's known as Issa. The Arabic name for Jesus is Issa, and it's much more likely that comes from Isis.
You're saying Isates is called Isa? Isates?
Isis is the short name.
Okay. All right. What I just want to, I'm just trying to look at this up. What book is this now? This is book.
It'll probably be in Antiquities. Let's see if I can look it up for you.
Okay. I just want to see this. That's all.
Well, it's very difficult to find unless you've got the Greek Josephus.
I'm actually looking at it. The side by side Greek and English.
Yeah.
Is this the Greek? Oh, let me see. I think I got the wrong one.
It's probably best to use Perseus if you don't have a Greek copy.
Perseus?
Perseus Tufts. It's the translation of all the old manuscripts.
Oh yeah. Okay. So we can look at this up. We can look this up then. I'm just trying to get on this. I'm just trying to answer.
You can, but it might take a while to find it. So it might be better to put it into a postscript later. Let me see if I can find it in my book. The trouble is I use the name Isis so many times, it's not going to be easy to look it up.
So we got book 20, section 15. He talks about Queen of Adiabene and her son Isates. Let's see if we can get the Greek real quick. Okay, I pulled up the Greek. I see, because I can actually read Greek. I'm not fluent in it, but I can actually read the words, and I can actually look at.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see. Where does it say Isates? I'm looking at Queen of Helena, Adiabene. Let's see. Isates. It says. Well, this one says Isates with the T.
But he's named on a number of occasions in that book, so you've got quite a few accounts to look at.
Okay, so for this one I can't find it, but maybe it's a different one.
I'll send you the link later. So,
Okay. All right.
But I can assure you, he is called he is called Jesus.
Okay. I'll just take your word for it then.
I'll send you a link later.
Yeah, sure. I'm just gonna pull up one more. I found another part from book 4, and I have the Greek here. Let's see. Adiabene Ischios. Yeah, it says Izates in this one too. So you know, that's two for it's. I only looked at 2 of them. I mean, if it's a nickname, I guess he wouldn't use it all the time.
No, he doesn't.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on.
I was fairly lucky to find it, I think, because of all the references to Izates. I managed to catch the one where he calls him Jesus. I use the William Whiston translation, which I think is a good translation.
Yeah, I had that one too, actually.
Yeah.
I should have that over here so we can look at. All right, let's just say that's true. Let's say his nickname is Jesus. Now, okay, that alone, we're back to square one with the same thing with this Asessi character in Egypt. It's really just a name. What now? Tell us about these attributes. I know some of them from reading the book. Just for some people listening, let's go over them.
Well, the main thing, it was, I mean, this is a series of books that culminated in this finding. So, I mean, you can't just go into the records and find Jesus and find that he's Jesus. This was the third in a trilogy of books before I found it. So this starts with the death of Caesar and Cleopatra being pregnant. So this is 43 BC. This is a long time ago, and she flees from Egypt. And Cicero is worried because she's pregnant when she leaves, and what he doesn't want is a scion of Caesar becoming the new emperor. So what we effectively have here, because the problem goes away, and either she must have had a miscarriage, or perhaps she had a daughter, because a daughter cannot become the next emperor. So what we have is the tradition of a lost daughter of Cleopatra, which is a fairly well-known tradition. And then later on, Octavian is trying to sort out his eastern borders, and he gives the king of Parthia, who's Phraates IV, a courtesan, a prostitute. And that's just not really possible, you know. The Parthians were the great enemy of Rome, and of course he had to do something very special to placate the Parthian king, and so there's no way he can get away with giving Phraates IV a courtesan called Thea Musa Aurania, one of these forgotten queens that nobody knows about. But I mean, he was so impressed with this courtesan that he made her his chief wife. And she became Queen Thea Musa Aurania, the queen of Parthia. So here we have an Egyptian princess who's now the queen of Parthia. Well, she, going through this very quickly, she poisons her husband in about 2 BC, and becomes the queen of Parthia on her own, in consort with her son, who's called Phraatesses. And they rule Parthia for 6 years. Until about AD 4, when they're kicked out of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my assertion that this is the biblical nativity story, because the nativity story never made any sense to me. Because what we have in the nativity is a king, because Jesus was called a king both on his birth and on his execution. On 36 occasions, he's called a king. I mean, that's what Christ means. Christ means king.
Well, it means anointed. It means anointed, but yeah.
The anointed king is what it means. So to be a Christ or a Messiah is to be a king, just the same as
you can be you could be an anointed priest, though, too.
Oh, yeah, it could be a priest king, yeah. But in the Old Testament, it's normally a king who's called the Messiah.
Normally, yes. Normally, the anointed is anointed.
I think it's David. Was it David or Solomon? I think it was David who was called the Messiah.
David was anointed, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the Persian kings was called a Messiah as well. So really, this term means it.
Well, in the terms of Christianity, it's a heavenly king.
Of course, but really, it's an earthly king. Really, it's only because they spiritualized it.
Right. So, but you don't have any. There's nobody talking about him being a king until the Gospels. It becomes a metaphor for he's the king. He's the the one who is passed down the heavenly realm from the Father and the Son. It's actually Philo has this theology where the Logos is the divine heir of the kingdom of heaven. So if you're the Messiah, you become the king in that sense. Now,
but only if you believe in the spiritual world. I mean, I'm talking about history here, not the Gospels.
Right, but there's nobody in history that's claiming that Jesus was the king. It's just in the gospel. It's just metaphor.
The Gospels does. The Gospels calls him a Christ. A Christ is the king, the anointed king.
Right,
exactly the same.
They're not saying he's the king in the real world of anything.
Yeah, but he is. It's quite obvious he is. I mean, he was anointed in exactly the same way that Queen Elizabeth II was anointed. Queen Elizabeth II of England is the Christ. She is the anointed king. Well, anointed queen, of course. She was anointed in exactly the same fashion as Jesus was.
What do you mean?
In the ceremony when she became queen, she was anointed. That was the tradition. She was anointed by the high priest.
Jesus was anointed by a woman putting oil on his feet.
Yes, she was the high priest. She is Mary Magdalene.
Who? Who's Mary?
Mary Magdalene was the high priest. That's what Mary means. In Syriac, Mary means the priest, the bishop. It's quite obvious that Mary Magdalene was a senior disciple within the Church of Jesus and James, and she is the one who anointed him.
So
that's beloved, when he became the king.
The root word of Miriam is beloved.
Only if you look it up in that dictionary. In Syriac, if you look it up in Syriac Aramaic, it means bishop. But they won't tell you that because they don't want Mary to be. That's why there were so Marys knocking around. It was a title.
Who's they? Won't tell me. Like, what do you mean by that? They won't tell us that.
The Catholic Church. I mean, the Catholic Church doesn't want you to know that Mary was an important character within the gospel story. She's sidelined. She's turned into a prostitute because they don't want you to know that Mary means priest or bishop, and she was the wife of Jesus, and she was very important and the chief disciple, as the Nag Hammadi Gospels actually say, because it was Mary who used to kiss Jesus on the lips, and it was Mary who was the chief initiate within the Church of Jesus and James, according to the Gnostic texts from the Nag Hammadi library. It's quite clear that she was a very important character, and she is the one who anointed Jesus.
Sure, but okay. But you said that Queen Elizabeth had the same anointing as Jesus.
She was anointed on the chest with oil.
What? Everyone's anointing is some sort of oil thing. That's
this was a sacred ceremony to make her the Queen of England. She was anointed in exactly the same fashion as Jesus. It's part of the old tradition.
Right, but what I'm saying with Mary and Jesus is this is not literally happening in like a kingdom. This is supposed to be the heavenly kingdom of heaven.
Well, if he was a king of Edessa, then it was within an earthly kingdom. That's the whole point of my analysis.
All right, let's get into how you figured out that this king. So let's go back to what you were saying. We're back in 4 AD, and you have this queen who was given by Augustus and she has a son named Phraates who becomes the king, right?
Yes.
All right.
And she has a daughter who's Queen Helena, the famous Queen Helena. So these people are exiled and they end up in Syria, eastern Syria, in about AD 4. And now what we have essentially is the nativity story, because the nativity story is odd because you get this lost king. And, that's very strange. How can you lose a king?
I just got booted out somehow. Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah. So you're back again. I thought, did you manage to pick up what I was saying there?
No, say that again.
Okay.
Time.
So in AD 4, no, I was talking about the nativity. So the nativity is very strange because it's a story of a king, a minor king who's been lost from history, obviously, because we have no record of this.
Well, we can't just say we have to establish that we know.
Just assume that this is correct, because that's what he's called. Let's believe the text. He's called a king. Let's believe the text that he was a king.
It's not saying he's a king.
Well, yeah, that's only your opinion. My opinion is he was a real king.
But we have.
That's why he was important.
Okay.
So we
We're
have this
talking
king
about
who,
we're talking about Israel, though. We're not in Edessa right now. He's
well,
being
they owned all of this land, so that's
no,
why he's associated with you.
under the Roman Empire. This is under
Yeah,
Augustus.
yeah, I know. They were given this land. These were the Babylonian Jews from beyond the Euphrates, and they were given this land by Herod and Octavian because they wanted someone to be a buffer state between Judea, between
Yeah,
Rome and
that's
Parthia.
up in the north. We're talking about Jerusalem.
No, they owned lands all the way past Damascus. They owned Palmyra, which is next door to Damascus. So they owned that eastern strip of land on the east
They
of.
didn't own Israel. Israel was part of the Roman Empire.
But they
It
did
was
later,
King Herod was
because
a puppet king set up by
yeah,
Augustus.
but Queen Helena became the queen of Judea in AD 50. She was the queen of the Jews.
No, she wasn't.
She had the largest palace and the largest tomb in Jerusalem. Look her up. She's Queen
I know
Helena.
who she is. She was a Jewish queen living in
Yes.
Edessa who donated money when they were starving. She was very praised by them, but she was
who had the largest palace in Jerusalem.
She built a palace.
She was the de facto queen of Judea.
That's you're adding that though. She was very wealthy and very praised. I'm not denying that. This is a fact. She actually was sort of a savior in a way because when they were starving, when they're having throughout the wars, she was bringing food and money.
Yes, of course.
But
she was the savior of Judea.
She's from Edessa, though.
Yeah, but she lived mostly in Judea at that time. That's why her tomb was in Jerusalem, not in Edessa. Her tomb was in Jerusalem. It's the largest tomb in Jerusalem. It's the tomb of the kings, just north of the old city. And so she became the de facto queen of the Jews at that time.
What do you mean when you say she's the de facto queen of the Jews? Where are you getting this from? You're just assuming that
because she had the largest palace and she had the largest tomb, and she furnished the Temple of Jerusalem, and she saved Judea from famine.
Elon Musk the king of America?
She was the de facto queen of.
But is Elon Musk the de facto king of America? He's got the spaceships. He's got the biggest land. He's got the most money. He's not the king, though. He's just Elon Musk. I mean, wouldn't that be the same sort of comparison?
Oh, I'm sure some people might regard him as the king. I mean, you've just got to look. You've got to look at the dynamics of this. We have several kings because at the same time, of course, Agrippa II was the nominal king of Judea, but he was secondary to the power and the wealth and the influence of Queen Helena.
Right, you're talking about a little bit later where there's a tetrarchy, where they split it up.
Well, in the AD 50s, it would have been Agrippa II, which is the time when Queen Helena became the queen of Judea.
Yeah, but I'm trying to understand what you're getting by saying that. Like, how do you know? Like, she
was a very, very powerful queen who was living in Jerusalem, who was the most powerful and the most wealthy.
I think she was visiting Jerusalem very often.
No, her palace was there.
She did build a palace there. That's true.
Yeah, of course.
Tell us that. But I mean, that doesn't make her. Does it just make her queen? It just makes her a rich, wealthy woman.
This was the whole point of the Jewish revolt: is they wanted to make sure they could take over the whole of that region.
Okay,
they were extending their influence throughout the east. They were given the eastern regions by Octavian, who gave the eastern regions to the Babylonian Jews from beyond the Euphrates.
Why would he set up King Herod as a puppet king in Judea if he was giving all the land to the...
Herod was long dead by this time.
Well, I'm talking about when Augustus was alive.
Oh, Herod, I see. Okay. Well, because Rome didn't want any more disputes with Parthia. They'd lost many legions to the Parthians already. What Octavian wanted was stability on the eastern borders. And so he wanted a buffer state between Rome and Parthia. This is a little bit like having Ukraine between Russia and America. They wanted a buffer state that could act as a stabilizing influence between these two empires.
And I'm not denying that at all. That's
okay. So that's why they were given this land on the eastern borders of Judea and Syria, from Edessa all the way down to Palmyra and down to Gamala, but Gamala on the plains, which is it's opposite Judea. It's on the east of Judea. So they were given all of these eastern lands tax-free by Octavian to act as a buffer state between Rome and Parthia. So we know there was this influential monarchy on the eastern borders of Rome, and that was controlled by the Edessan monarchy, by Queen Helena at that time. So where do we get to? With the nativity, we have this lost monarchy who did have lands as far south as Judea, who were for some reason on the move and in a stable because they didn't have a palace for some strange reason. And
Yeah,
this
but how
was
do you? I just have to get. I'm trying to understand this. You have King Herod when Jesus is born. So how is Jesus being born as a king if you already have King Herod? Who is like?
Well, they
I'm
had
saying,
multiple kings. There were loads and loads of kings in that region. I mean,
right,
and
but
they're all vying.
these are all satrap kings under the Roman Empire, or
Yeah, of course,
if it's the Parthians, it's over there.
of course.
But they're not. But so we're talking about this little area of Judea where Jesus is born, and right at that time,
Well, you
have King Herod, and then when Herod dies, it splits up into his sons.
Well, no, it would have been Herod Archelaus anyway. Herod was long dead by this time. They came out of Parthia in AD 4, so it would have been Herod Archelaus who was the tetrarch involved,
Right.
not Herod the Great.
That's what I'm saying. So what?
Yeah.
We know who the kings were at this time. It's no secret.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
how do you get that this baby who's born is a king already? What do you mean? Just because of the gospel?
Well, he was a prince, of course, because he was only a baby. The king was Abgarus the fifth, of course.
Of course. What do you mean, of course?
But of course, every baby is a prince. You know, he doesn't become a baby when he's born. Sorry, he doesn't become a king when he's born.
How are you linking the Jesus in the Gospels to Abgarus the fifth? In what is this?
Well, if you let me continue, we have this nativity story, which doesn't make any sense.
I'm just stop cutting you off. I'm just going to take notes, and we'll get to it.
So what we're trying to find is this lost king, because how can we lose a king in this era, in this area, which is well documented, so that nobody knows who this king is, and why would at this birth, why would the Persian Magi come to this birth, the three kings? Doesn't make any sense that the Persian Magi would be interested. The Magi were the priests and the kingmakers of Parthia. Why would they be interested in this birth of this Jew in Judea or Syria and come to his birth? Well, as the exiled queen and this young prince of Parthia being born somewhere in Judea or Syria, of course they would be interested in this birth. So here we have the sort of a nativity story. We have a royal family that was on the move, being kicked out of Parthia. They obviously didn't have a palace at that time to stay in. They could have been in a stable. They were very rich and influential, but they were relatively unknown, so you could lose them from history, and largely they were lost from history. And of course, the Persian Magi would have been interested in any birth to this royal family, because any birth to this royal family could be a potential prince and king of Parthia. So of course the Magi would come to this birth and have a look at it. So essentially what we've got here is the nativity story. And it's a real story out of real history with real monarchs who have gone missing from the historical record.
Who wrote this? Who's recording this?
Well, it's a combination of Josephus and Moses of Corinne and the gospel texts. So we have this record from Josephus. We have it from some of the Roman records.
But in Josephus, there's no record of any Magi coming and meet a king in Judea. You don't have that in Josephus.
No, that's from the Gospels.
Right. So I'm saying who's recording this particular moment as a historical moment? Because when I read this, it reads like any other, the star in the east. This happens with Augustus. It happens with Mithridates. Where there's a star, and the Magi, who are interpreters, they're astrologers. They're the ones who it's basically saying, "Oh, look, this is the king of the world. This is even the astrologers know he's the king of the world."
That was a well-known prophecy. That was the star prophecy. I mean, that was a Judaic prophecy that the new emperor of the world, the king of the world, would be a star from the east. That was the star prophecy. That was the prophecy
let's hold on to that for a second. I'm gonna let you continue. I keep cutting you
Yeah,
off.
that was the prophecy that Josephus gave to Emperor Vespasian when he became emperor. He gave him the star prophecy and said, "You're in the east, therefore you are the star from the east." But who was born under the Eastern Star? That was the Jesus character, of course. That's why I link this up with the Jewish revolt and Vespasian, because that's exactly the same prophecy that Josephus gave to Commander Vespasian to make him into the emperor. So what I'm basically saying is we do have a lost monarchy. In fact, we have two, because there's another monarchy just down further south at Emesa. So we have Edessa and Emesa, and we have two regional monarchies who were subservient to Rome, of course, who had their own ideas about, their future. And so we do have a lost monarch who could be the monarch that is mentioned in the gospel story. And so, well, what do we do with that? So a bit later on, we move into, because Jesus goes missing, of course, for many years. And I say, of course, in the works of Josephus, he is the Egyptian false prophet, because Jesus goes to Egypt for his education. Well, the Gospels say they go there to flee from Herod, but it's quite obvious that as a prince of the realm of Edessa, he would have gone to Egypt for his education, because that's where a lot of people went. They went to Alexandria, was the greatest school in the whole of the Roman Empire. And so anyone with any money would send their sons to Alexandria. And that's where Jesus went. He went to Egypt for the whole of his youth, so for his education period. Out of Egypt I have called my son. So yeah, he would have gone down there. He would have been instructed in the mysteries and the knowledge and the science of Egypt. He would have been a very knowledgeable, well-educated person. And what else do we get at that stage? We get Jesus impressing the priests by teaching them when he was 12 years old. We have that wonderful little story, and I don't know why that's made into a miracle, because it's quite obviously his bar mitzvah. That's what you do at a bar mitzvah. You have to give a Bible reading, and you have to answer questions from your local rabbi. But of course, if you're very, very wealthy and influential, you're going to go and have that bar mitzvah with the high priest of Jerusalem, which is exactly what I think he did.
Why would they say it's bar mitzvah then? Why wouldn't they just say he's in there studying?
Because they want everything to be a miracle. I mean, Josephus does exactly the same. Josephus amazes the high priests in the temple when he was 14. And they don't mention that this is a bar mitzvah. It's quite obviously it's a bar mitzvah. I mean, they want to make everything miraculous. And of course, it's not miraculous at all. It's just real history. And they cover a lot of this up. It's like the water to wine story.
I'm just confused. Why even put that in there? And why even?
Because they want miracles. It's like the water to wine story.
Just make up any miracle.
Well, yeah, but no, these were real things that happened. You see, at this very time, AD 50s, when I say all this was happening, they had a hero of Alexandria, was the sort of Leonardo da Vinci of the first century. And he made all sorts of mechanical devices, including birds that sang and automatic doors and things that flew with magnets, all sorts of wonderful devices.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing he liked making most was trick jugs that turned water into wine.
Oh, wow.
This was a well-known first century trick. And these are actually very complex jugs. I mean, they've got two compartments in there, and they work on water surface tension and siphonic action. And you can put your thumb over a little hole in the handle, and you can pour out either wine or you can pour out water. This was a trick for the aristocracy, to amaze the aristocracy, and maybe even for the priesthood to amaze the congregations in the temple. But it rather shows that Jesus was a very aristocratic, rich, influential person in order to be able to afford one of these trick jugs by Hieron of Alexandria. But of course, within the gospel story, they have to try and make it into a miracle. Oh, it's a miracle. No, it's not. It's a trick jug by Hieron of Alexandria. We've got the original designs for them. We've still got the original design.
Sure, I'm not doubting those exist. What what can it just be that just made up a story that he's turning water into wine? Because
no, it's based on real history. All of this is based on real history. That's the beauty of
what
my.
about the Dionysus aspect of Jesus is the true vine? Dionysus does this exact same miracle in some of his myths. Well, I mean, can't you say it's sort of a polemic towards the
You could, but I did. You see, the beauty of I think of the work that I've done is the story remains 90% correct.
right?
So the
And
gospel story almost becomes real history, but you've just got to be able to interpret it in the right fashion. That's all.
okay, let's continue past the wine thing. All right, so let's keep going. How do we figure out this is the king of Edessa? Let's keep going.
Okay, well, basically, this is to do with the Jewish revolt. So the basic premise is that the Jesus character. Let's go back to basics. The basic premise is that we have a 40-year lacuna between the events in the Gospels and when they actually happened. So the Gospels will say that this happened in the AD 20s, and I say they happened in the AD 60s. And this was all to do with the Jewish revolt. But they moved the story back because they didn't want this character involved in a revolt against Rome. They didn't want anyone venerating a person who had revolted against Rome. So they moved the story back, stuck it in the AD 20s, and nobody has seen that deceit ever since. But so you can look all of your life in the AD 20s and you'll never find the Jesus character. That's why nobody can find him in the historical record. But if you look in the AD 60s, suddenly we find a load of people who look exactly like the biblical Jesus. And the first of those, of course, is Jesus of Gamala. Jesus of Gamala was one of the leaders of the Jewish revolt. And according to Robert Eisenman, he married Mary Magdalene. So there's a link for a start. Although Eisenman,
Really?
after
Eisman thinks that this is the
yeah. Although at the end, when I congratulated him on his, because he devotes 200 pages to this, and he says that she is Mary Bothus, Mary and Martha Bothus, who and his name was Simon Bothus. They lived at the house of Simon. So this
how
is the
that Mary
Bethany sisters who lived at the house of Simon. It's the same story. But in the
wait,
final,
Martha is the Martha of the priestly family of Boethius. That's not Mary Magdalene, though.
yeah, but there was two of them. There was Mary and Martha. There were two sisters. According to Eisenman, there were two sisters, not just Martha. So yeah, and these are AD 60s characters because Simon both was involved in the Jewish revolt. He was one of the leaders of the revolt. In the final analysis, when I asked Eisenman about that and congratulated him on finding this, he said, no, they're not the same person,
Right.
because they live in different eras. Mary Magdalene has to be an AD 20s character, so he cannot overcome that, what I call the chronological chasm, and jump into the AD 60s. If he had been able to jump into the AD 60s, he would have seen they are the same person.
Why can't there be two different people, Martha and Mary? Why does it have to be the same person? Martha,
because their lives are identical. She marries.
How do you say their lives are identical? I don't understand that at all.
Well, because she marries Jesus, and she pays for Jesus. Mary Bothus. She married Jesus of Gamala.
Her name is Martha, first of all, but she marries Jesus of Gamala. Okay.
Yeah, and Jesus of Gamala Saphias, he has two names. Jesus of Gamala Saphias was the leader of 600 rebel fishermen. Now, who was the leader of 600 rebel fishermen in this era? It was the biblical Jesus. We're talking about the same events here. The only problem with this, and the reason why they can't admit that Mary Magdalene was Mary Bothus, was she was the richest woman in Judea. And that changes the story. They don't want you to know that Mary Magdalene was the richest woman in Judea. She had, when she married
How would you
Jesus,
find that out? How would you know that?
It's in the Talmud.
Mary Magdalene is the richest in Judea.
Yeah, Mary Bothus, when she married Jesus.
You're assuming it's the same person and then going off that.
No,
Like,
it's not an assumption. There's 200 pages of research by Robert Eisenman and myself that demonstrate it, and it's not just based on a similar name.
he's not even saying it's Mary.
No, because he can't imagine that Mary Magdalene was living in the AD 60s.
Right.
If
Because there's no reason to. I mean, it could be two different people.
Well, you could say that all of this happened in the AD 30s and she was an AD 30s character and therefore she is Mary Magdalene. But the AD 30s events don't fit the rest of the story. This is a Jewish revolt story.
But the Gospels are not claiming to be a Jewish revolt story.
Well, yes, they are. Jesus was jailed alongside rebels who had committed murder in the revolution. What revolution was that?
But he doesn't even know them. They don't even connect him to those guys. He's the innocent one, and they're the guilty ones. Remember that?
That's only from a Christian viewpoint.
Don't you see how much
you're putting a Christian gloss on this?
No, I'm not. I don't even think the story. I don't even think the story happened. I don't even think it's true.
He was a revolutionary. It's quite obvious from the. This is the guy who says, I did not come to bring peace to this land.
Sure.
I came to bring a sword.
I
came to set father against son, to set mother against daughter,
right.
And all of the foes will be in your household. What is that if not for a civil war?
Just to get the conversation to continue, let's Mary of Magdalene, Mary, Martha, and Jesus of Gamala. I'm not sold that this is the same person, but
it's part of the larger context. You have to look at this in the larger context. That Jesus of Gamala was the rebel fisherman rebel leader.
Why hide that? Okay, so, but isn't it's still the same? It's still a different person than Isates.
No, because they have the same name. It's quite obvious that they've been given two names. So these two people arrive at the same time. They have very similar names. They're called Isus and Jesus. It's quite obvious that Jesus of Gamala was one of the Babylonian Jews from beyond the Euphrates who were exiled to Syria and Judea in about AD 4. Again, we have two stories from Josephus. We have the Queen Theamusa Orania story, when she was exiled with Queen Helena. And then we have the story of the Babylonian Jews from beyond the Euphrates who were exiled to Syria, Judea at the very same time. And these people obviously became leaders of the fourth sect of Judaism. And so we have Judas of Gamala, and I say his son would have been Jesus of Gamala in the next generation. And he was an AD 60s rebel, and he was blamed for starting the Jewish revolt. So we're back to the Jewish revolt here. And of course, the Jewish revolt was actually started by King Isates and King Manu of Edessa.
Oh my God.
They started the revolt.
Why hide this history, though? Why is this all hidden in history?
Because Rome didn't want you to know anything about these people.
Why?
Well, because they started a revolt against Rome.
Why would they secretly want to worship this Jesus character who is a revolt? He's revolting against their nation.
Because Josephus had started, Saul / Josephus, we'll go into this in a minute, had started this new Rome-friendly form of Judaism. I call it simple Judaism. We call it Christianity. Remember, there was a split between these two churches.
Sure.
We had the Church of Jesus and James, who was Nazarene. They were, fairly fundamentalist Nazarene Jews. And then we had Saul that went off on his own and started the Church of simple Judaism, I call it, teaching to the Gentiles. So he became the apostle to the Gentiles. And these two churches were very, very different. One was Judaic and fundamentalist and messianic, and the other one was Rome-friendly and didn't abide by Mosaic law or anything of that nature. And of course, they became at loggerheads with one another. They were almost at war with each other. And it was Saul, the Saul Josephus character, who actually won this battle. He became more powerful than the Church of Jesus and James.
The Saul Josephus character, what does that
mean?
Yeah,
we'll go into that in a minute. But the thing is that when the Jewish revolt started, of course, what did Rome want? They wanted to neuter this messianic Judaism. which was causing the revolt in the first place. And what better, you've got two ways of doing this. You can defeat them militarily, which they sort of did anyway. But the other way to do it is to destroy their supporters by neutering this messianic Judaism. And how do you do that? Well, you use Saul's simple Judaism for Gentiles, which was Rome friendly. If you promote that, you're going to neuter anything to do with messianic Judaism, and hopefully your political problem will go away. And so as a part of that process, they instituted what we call Christianity, which is the simple Judaism of Saul, and they banned any mention of the Edessan royalty, which is why when you go through the works of Josephus, you can type in Edessa, you can type in Abgarus, you can type in Manu, anything to do with the royal family of Edessa, and it's not in the works of Josephus. It's been deleted completely from history. It's not even in the sort of Roman records, pretty much. So this royal family, who was the rebel royal family who fought a revolt against Rome, have been deleted from history, deliberately deleted, because they didn't want you venerating someone who had started a revolt against Rome.
You're still secretly venerating someone who started this. Why would they want you? If they don't want you to venerate someone who's starting a revolt against Rome, why would they want you to secretly worship someone who started? What's the difference? And
because a lot of people in that region were secretly venerating this person anyway. So either you've got to delete this veneration completely, probably by killing all the people, or you change their views. And the way they did it was they changed their views. They changed the religion. And we know they changed their religion from Messianic Judaism into what we call Christianity, with a completely different view of the same person. That's why I call this the Jewish revolt story with fairy dust put upon it, because it's the same story. You can look at this story right the way through the gospel story. It's the same as the Jewish revolt all the way through. But it's been covered in fairy dust.
Yeah, but
it's political.
I'm not seeing that at all.
Like, it's propaganda. It's Roman propaganda.
This is why this sort of reminds you of the Roman Providence thing, where it's like you're taking things that happen in history and with giant strokes, like Christianity ended up being the state religion of Rome. So therefore, it must have been created by them to end up that way. It's sort of like you're looking at the final result and then like just making huge assumptions and speculation into.
Yeah, but this is not broad brush, because I've written nearly 2,000 pages on this. This is not broad brush. I go into the fine detail.
So how does Paul's letter? Do you think Paul's letters are written after the Jewish revolt?
No, they were written at the same time. But that's always the problem with Paul's letters. Is Paul's letters does not give the full crucifixion story. Nowhere in his letters does he give the full story of what happened at the crucifixion. And you would have thought that this guy going across, if Jesus had been crucified in the AD 30s, and he's going out, you get the odd little tacked on word at the end of a verse saying he was crucified or something like that. Nowhere is the story. Where is the story of his arrest
before the Jewish revolt is over?
Yeah, I know. That's why he doesn't mention.
How does that work? How does he worshiping Jesus, who didn't even do his thing yet? He didn't even revolt yet.
Because he was the king. Of course, he was being venerated.
He didn't die yet, though.
Yeah, you don't have to die to be venerated as a king.
As a crucified, dying, and rising Savior, you don't have to die.
He wasn't being venerated as being crucified.
Jesus, the second coming of Jesus. He died for our sins. All that stuff is before he died in real life.
Yeah, but of course he died and was resurrected. I have died and been resurrected. It's exactly the same. I am a Mason. I have died. Do you not know anything about Freemasonry?
No, I get the whole mock death thing. Yeah. I understand that. But
so what's the third degree initiation?
Do you understand that you just completely speculated that there's some sort of Masonic secret thing happening?
So what was Jesus called? He was called a carpenter. But he's not called a carpenter at all, is he?
This is all written way later. First of all,
no.
Talk about Paul.
In the Greek, he is called a tecton. What's a tecton?
I know that.
A tecton is a Freemason.
fine. I'm fine with that. But what I'm saying
What is the resurrection of
you're
Lazarus?
you're in a whole different area right now. We're talking.
No. What's the resurrection of Lazarus? What is that story based upon?
I don't want to get there yet. I'm trying to focus on
It's a third-degree initiation. So
Oh.
Jesus would have had a third-degree initiation exactly the same as Lazarus did, and he would have had that initiation in the 80s, 30s, or 40s
Why are you
when he became.
You're just assuming. How are you just assuming that though? That's what I don't
Because
understand. So what you assume one thing, and then you build off that assumption with another assumption, and then you assume another thing, and then you speculate another thing, and then you have this entire house of cards that's like all you had to do is pull the one from the bottom, and none of them even fit anymore.
Yeah, but there are multiple pointers towards Jesus being a Freemason. We know Freemasonry goes back to the Temple of Solomon and to Solomon himself. That's what it's based upon, of course.
I don't care about that. What I'm saying is, why is Paul writing about Jesus who died and crucified and is going to return?
Well, he doesn't. That's the whole problem. You look at the epistles, and nowhere in the epistles do you get the full crucifixion story. Where is the trial? Where is the scourging? Where is the crucifixion? Where are the women standing around?
Who crucified is the salvation. Explains that
you get single little mentions that someone has jotted on the end of a verse saying, and he was crucified.
There's enough there to know what he's talking.
There is no crucifixion story within the epistles, and that's a real problem that Saul was not giving.
The book of Hebrews says that Jesus was crucified outside the temple. You don't remember that part? I'm going to show you.
And it's a line that's been tacked onto a verse, hasn't it?
So everything that has to do with Jesus' death is an interpolation.
Well, there is no story of the crucifixion within the epistles, is there?
Yes, there is. There's tons of it.
It says, Corinthians, was Paul crucified for you? We preach Christ crucified.
Yes.
Jesus Christ and him crucified.
So what is that? How is that not crucifixion?
That's not the crucifixion story. Where's the story? The story doesn't exist. You've got a couple of little lines
writing a letter
tacked on to the end of a few verses.
It's not supposed to be a story.
Jesus Christ has been evidently set forth crucified amongst you. That's not the crucifixion story.
It didn't happen yet. You're not understanding. There's a simple question. Why would he even say that at all if it didn't happen?
Because these are little additions. They've been tacked on to the end of each verse. There is no crucifixion story within the epistles. And people have recognized this for a long, long time, that this is a real problem with the story. Why was Saul not going around the Mediterranean lamenting this entire tragic story of Jesus being crucified? The trial, Pontius Pilate is never mentioned in the epistles. The soldier, the sponge, the spear, the women round the cross. There is not that story.
Josephus telling you a story about Jesus and Jesus of Kamala and Azatis as three different people, if he knows that they're all the same person. Is he in on this?
Well, because there are multiple people who wrote this history, and therefore they've used different names. He's called Gamala, but then the Edessan kings are called Gamala anyway. Their title is Karma. As in karma, as in Gamala. It's the same. It's based on the same spelling. The name of the Edessan king was Abgarus Okama, the same as Gamala.
So here. Hebrews 13. Jesus suffered outside the city gate to sanctify the people by his own blood. What is he talking about? What is the
That's not the crucifixion story.
But these are letters, though. You put them all together, you get enough there that we know this are talking about someone who died.
These are little additions because someone was going through these. Someone was going through these stories and they could not find the crucifixion story of Jesus, and so they tacked on a few little mentions of crucifixion within the epistles.
Why not just make up entire epistles about it then? Why would they have to go through this?
Well, we have. Alternatively, if we look at the real history, we have the crucifixion story from Josephus, and it's a much more believable. Yeah, we have the whole story from Josephus.
Yeah.
So Josephus, you know this, yeah? He was coming back from Tekoa when he was a Roman army commander.
Josephus tells us in book, what is it, 13, I think it is, about Jesus being crucified by Pontius Pilate.
No, not that section. No.
So why would he? Okay,
This is this is an interpolation. Everyone knows that's an interpolation.
Yeah, but to a degree.
It's a complete interpolation. It's got no reference to the rest of Josephus' works whatsoever. No,
Well, he mentions them twice. He mentions them again in book 20. Jesus.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about life. So vita. So at the end of the Jewish revolt, so the revolt has finished. Josephus is now a Roman army commander. He is coming back into Jerusalem, and he sees the three leaders of the Jewish revolt being crucified. So 3 leaders of the revolt, the same as Jesus was involved in a revolt, were being crucified, and they were his former compatriots. And he thought this was stupid, so he went to the governor and he asked for them to be taken down early. So they were taken down early. 2 of them died and 1 of them survived. Right. That is the crucifixion story.
No, it's not the same thing.
It's the leaders of the revolt, and the leaders of the revolt would have included King Jesus.
You're already assuming that Jesus was the leader of the revolt in the Gospels, but it never says that.
Well, it does, because I mean, it clearly says that he came to set father against son and mother against daughter.
So you're using that one little verse and saying this means he's the leader of the revolt. What about
he sent all of his disciples out to go and buy swords?
What about him saying, "Pay to Caesar what is Caesar, pay to God"? What about that?
Sorry, which one?
Pay to Caesar what is Caesar's.
Yeah, of course they wanted to do that. That's the reinterpretation of the biblical text to make them Rome friendly.
So you have an invincible theory where if something doesn't fit, it's just an added something by the church, interpolation. But everything else, I'm just going to assume. You're basically just saying, let's make this fit if it has to fit. But if it doesn't fit, then it must be some sort of interpolation later on. You understand that? That's what it seems like from the outside looking in.
Well, it might be, but there's an awful lot of evidence that what I'm saying is correct. Of course, the church wanted a revised history of the Jewish revolt because they didn't want you to know that this guy was a leader of the Jewish revolt. And so they've, as I said, sprinkled it with fairy dust in order to make it more acceptable.
Why would they want to venerate that thing then? Why would they want to even have a part in that?
Because it was a useful tool to stop the people of the East believing in Messianic Judaism. They wanted a Rome-friendly form of Judaism, and the Saul Josephus character gave them that. And that was a part of the story. And so they went along with it, even though, because the Saul character wanted to venerate himself. It's quite obvious that he wanted to venerate himself, but he couldn't. People stoned him every time he said that. They wanted to venerate the Jesus character. And so they made a sort of Rome-friendly, pacifist sort of Jesus character, when it's quite clear in the Gospels that he wasn't, that he was an army commander. I mean, for instance...
and then I got to ask you, who made this up? Who wrote these Gospels? Who did this?
Saul Josephus.
Saul Josephus wrote the Gospels.
Well, he would have been an editor. He would have overseen them, because
Paul, you're saying
he was the last man. Because
before the revolt even happens, he's already writing letters about Jesus crucified.
Yeah, because he went on and well, no, we've already said there at small interpolations. There is no
It's like 30 interpolations you're talking about.
Well, not really. Looking at it here, I've only got about 12, I think, from Corinthians and Galatians and Hebrews, and that's about it. And they just say one little word, crucified. That's all they say.
That's all you need. It's one word is all you need. Crucified.
No, you don't. That's an interpolation. Of course, they wanted to try and say that Jesus had been crucified because that was the story. But they couldn't write about it because it hadn't happened yet. So Saul went across the Mediterranean in AD 52 was his first tour. And he went across the Mediterranean as a Nazarene Jew, and he wasn't really accepted. So in AD 54 at the Jerusalem Council, he went to James, the brother of Jesus, and said, look, can I preach to the Gentiles? And James said yes, and he gave him the 4 rules of simple Judaism. Do not eat any meat that's been sacrificed to idols. Do not drink any blood. Do not eat any meat from a strangled animal. And don't indulge in fornication. And they were the 4 rules of simple Judaism given by James to Saul to go and preach to the Gentiles. And that's what he did. So in his second tour, he went off and he preached to the Gentiles. And now we have a Gentile form of Judaism. This is the Council of Jerusalem. You should know all about this.
No, I don't understand what that has to do with anything we're talking about.
Because he has already created a Rome-friendly form of simple Judaism for Gentiles in AD 54-55. This is long before the Jewish revolt. And so this was an established religion before the Jewish revolt even happened. And so when they were looking for a way to neuter Messianic Judaism, they already had this in the bag. It was already there. It was a recognized church already.
Circular. That's so circular, though, what you're saying.
No, it's not.
You're saying when they, I don't know who when they is, when they wanted...
They would be Vespasian.
Vespasian now. Okay. So what does Vespasian have to do? All right. So
because he wanted to neuter Messianic Judaism, because he had just fought a great war with the Messianic Jews. The last thing he wanted was the continuation of Messianic Judaism. And so he wanted a Rome-friendly form of Judaism that would supplant it and neuter it. And Saul Josephus's Judaism for Gentiles was just perfect. And so they adopted it. There was no point inventing something else. It was already there. It was in the bag. It was up and running. And so they promoted it. And remember that Josephus was the last man standing, the last Jew standing after the Jewish revolt. He became the de facto king of Judea after the Jewish revolt. Everyone else had been taken into slavery. Jerusalem had been banned to Jews. No Jew was allowed to step in Jerusalem.
Josephus was the king of Judea.
De facto, he controlled the whole of the region under the Romans.
He was a slave. He was brought back to Vespasian as a slave and was taken through the triumph with two other people, with John and...
No, he wasn't.
That's what Josephus says. Yeah.
No, he doesn't. Yes, Josephus was the guy who wrote all his books in the AD 70s. He was working for Josephus.
As a slave during the war.
No, he wasn't. He was an army commander.
Fact. Josephus,
no, he was an army commander.
Yes, he was an army commander. He lost the battle in Galilee and was taken as a slave.
You mean in Jotapata? He was not taken as a slave. He was taken as a chief propaganda minister for the Romans. He became their Lord Haw.
He was never a king. He was a slave of Vespasian.
I said de facto king.
Yeah, but how?
He was the last Jew standing after the Jewish revolt. He had all the power of Rome because he had the ear of the emperor.
He was taken in as a slave by Vespasian with two other people. That's what the text tells us.
No, he became an army commander. He was in command of the Roman army. He was their chief propaganda minister. He was in charge of the...
Two different things, propaganda minister and general. He's living in Rome for the rest of his days under Vespasian. And
he was given lands in Yabni. He was given lands in Yabni, which is south of Tel Aviv, because he lost his lands in Jerusalem due to Vespasian and the war. So they gave him lands on the plain instead, and they set up a Sanhedrin at Yabni.
Yeah, but I don't think Josephus was there. That's not Josephus. That's something else.
He was given lands, according to Josephus himself. He was given lands on the plain to the west of Jerusalem. That is Yabni.
That's not.
It's quite clear he was very powerful. That's how he managed to write all of these books, because these books are hugely expensive. You need a scriptorium for this. You don't write them on your own.
Yeah,
and he was given the power and the money.
This is after he was taken in as a slave from Vespasian.
He was never a slave. He was a spy, if anything. He was a spy working for Rome ever since he had gone to see Nero back in AD 62. It seems quite obvious to me he was turned because what Rome wanted, because they knew things were unsettled in the east, and what Rome wanted was ears on the ground in Judea.
But there's no evidence or anything referencing to him being like de facto king of Judea. I mean, I don't see that anywhere. Not even his own words.
Because he had the ear of the emperor and nobody else did. So therefore, whatever he wanted to do in Judea, he would go to Vespasian and say, "Can I do this, guy?" And yeah, he was given the authority to do whatever he liked. And so, even more, if he became the high priest of the Jews at that point, so Yohanan ben Zakkai, who nobody knows who this guy was, but he has a history that's very, very similar to Josephus. And Yohanan ben Zakkai was the guy who wrote most of the Talmud.
Well, it's a lot of the sources in the Talmud are, I mean,
By Yohanan ben Zakkai, yes.
Yeah, but how can he wrote most of the Talmud if most of the Talmud's after the 1st century?
Yeah, I know, but these traditions and these texts were kept, and then it was written down later. But
right,
if you look at the commentaries,
I agree with that. But I'm saying, like, Yohanan ben Zakkai is supposedly met with Vespasian, according to the Talmud. And
exactly the same as Josephus met.
So you're saying it's the same person?
It could well be, because we don't know who Yohanan ben Zakkai is, of course.
Yeah, we do. We have tons of information on him. We know exactly who he is.
No, we don't. There is no evidence of who he is, apart from the name and his writings.
Yohanan ben Zakkai, he's got a Wikipedia page with tons of information.
Yeah, of course, because they make up. It's like if you look at Shakespeare.
Who's they? Why would they make up stuff about somebody for no reason?
Because the Jews don't want the fact that they don't know who their primary priest who created
he's got a tomb.
rabbinic Judaism.
He's got a tomb in Tiberias.
He's got what?
He's got a tomb in Tiberias. He was a sage in Galilee. This is one of the, we know who he is. It's not like he's some random guy. Like, how would you even know who he is to begin with if no one knows who he is?
It's a bit like the Shakespeare problem. People say they know who Shakespeare is, and yet nobody knows who Shakespeare is.
Yeah, but
because
we got tons of information on this guy. Like, we have his life story pretty much.
No, I don't think so. I'll look that up later, but that's a side element. I don't delve much into that. But the thing is that after the Jewish revolt, the guy who was in charge of Judea was Josephus Flavius. He was the chief pet of Emperor Vespasian. So anything in terms of course, he didn't control the nation. That was controlled by Rome. But anything to do with the society and the religion of the Jews was down to Josephus Flavius, because he was the chief pet of Emperor Vespasian. Whatever Vespasian wanted him to do, he would do. He was just the perfect patsy. And he was used in that fashion all the way up until about, I don't know, AD 90s or something, when he fell foul of one of the emperors and was probably executed.
Your end game is they created a secret religion that's based off this king who they don't like, who they fought against, and they want you to worship this secret religion that's really secretly worshiping their own enemy.
Yeah, this is the thing, but we know that even from standard Christianity, anyone who is worshiping, who is venerating Christianity, is venerating the enemy of Jesus, because Jesus was not a Christian; he was a Nazarene Jew. Only Saul was the Christian.
Christianity wasn't even a thing yet, because he didn't have to. He couldn't. You can't have Christianity without Jesus' death. So he's a Jew.
Yes, you can. That's just an addition to the story. Saul was venerating simple Judaism back in the AD 50s, 15 years before Jesus' death. You don't need to have
Vespasian and Josephus create a religion based off a man who they went to war with, who was trying to overthrow them. Why?
Yeah, no, that's not what I said. I said the religion already existed. It existed 15 years before the war erupted.
The point I'm saying is, you're saying Vespasian, under his rule,
he adopted it,
which there is no Saul Josephus. But anyways, let's say he exists. Saul Josephus, he has him write out this new history, this alternative history, and secretly makes a religion that worships the man that they went to war against. According to you,
the religion already existed. It had existed since the AD 50s,
and
when it was set up by
Jewish
James.
Revolt was not Azatis either. We know what happened in the Jewish revolt. Nero went in to steal money from the temple. He sent in Jessius Florus, and it pissed off a bunch of people in Judea, and they revolted, and there was a war after that. And
no, it was not according.
There was no Azatis in the story at all.
According to the Talmud, one of the reasons they had this revolt was because Bar Kamsa gave an imperfect cow, an imperfect calf, to the high priest of Jerusalem. It was an offering by Emperor Nero that was given to the high priest of Jerusalem. And it was given by Bar Kamsa, who is the Jesus character. He is the King Jesus character. We know that
Wait,
because
how
he's
do you
called
know that?
because he's called a locust. The Edessans were called locusts, and he's dressed. He's
Because
dressed
it's all
in.
the locust that makes him the same. You have 4 different people who are Jesus now.
Well, yes, because they've all been given different names. Look,
Wait, but you just drew a complete. You just jumped over a cliff and said he's
no,
the
only
same
because you
person.
haven't read my books. Look, this guy was the leader of the Jewish revolt. Bar Kamsa caused the Jewish revolt, according to the Talmud. Therefore, he's in the same bracket as King Jesus, who also started the Jewish revolt, and he was tasked by himself to get a sacrificial calf from Nero and give it to the high priesthood, so that it would be rejected, in order to start the Jewish revolt.
Right.
And
But
Bar
that's the reason.
Kamsa.
I understand this story. I heard this story a million times.
Yeah.
The reason why they did all this is because Nero sacked their temple, sent Josephus Florus in there to take all the money out, and they were pissed
Well,
about
that was one of the reasons, but there were many reasons. This was a tax revolt. And so one of the other reasons was the Edessans didn't want their lands. They were given their lands tax-free, and now Rome was trying to tax them. That was another reason. This was a tax revolt. And you can see that from the parable of the vineyard owner. So in the parable of the vineyard owner, we have a vineyard owner who rents out his lands to a tenant. And then when the fruit is due, he asks for his rent, and the tenant will not give him any rent. And so the Jesus character, this is a parable from Jesus himself, says,
Right.
"What shall we do with these terrible tenants who won't pay their rent? We shall kill them, and we will give our lands to much better tenants who will pay their rent on time." Now, why is the Jesus character upholding the rights of absentee landlords to kill the tenant if he doesn't give any rent? In standard gospel history, that makes no sense whatsoever. But in terms of the Edessan story, it makes perfect sense. So all you need to know is
It does
that
make sense. It does make sense in terms of the Gospels.
So why was Jesus?
Because if the people who are chosen to be God's people do not follow the way of the Messiah who's come and is right in front of them, he will give it over to the Gentiles. That's what that means. It's
Yeah,
a simple.
it's not. It's saying that a tenant must pay his rent, and if he doesn't pay his rent, he gets killed.
Right. That's the parable. That's what the parable is supposed to mean.
But what's that got to do with the pauper Prince of Peace? It's got nothing to do with it. I thought this was a man of the people.
He's talking about salvation. If you want salvation,
No, he's talking about Edessa. So all you need to know for this parable is that the landowner is the Edessan royalty who thought that they owned these lands, and Rome was occupying these lands. They are the tenant.
There's nothing in history that says that the kings of Edessa owned Jerusalem. Nothing.
No, they didn't own Jerusalem, although Queen Helena tried to take it over, but they were given lands in Syria and in the east of Judea around Jordan region, which were given to them tax-free by Octavian. And of course, they didn't want to give any taxes to Rome. They were given this land tax-free. So there was a tax dispute. So the tenant is the evil tenant is Rome, because Rome wouldn't pay them rent for being on their land.
The Gospels are written by Vespasian and Josephus.
Yeah, but they were drawing on all of this material. I mean, this Josephus character, the Saul character.
Wait. Hold on. Pause it. You're telling me that Vespasian and Josephus, who you think is Paul, wrote these Gospels, and they threw in a parable about Rome being evil and not paying their rent.
Yeah, because these Gospels were derived from multiple sources, and many of their sources were linked to Edessa. I mean, you've got to link, for instance, Saul was an ambassador of Edessa. We know that from the story of Agabus. So we have the story of Agabus. You remember who forecast the famine in Judea and sent famine relief money.
Sure.
Well, who sent that famine relief money? Well, we know it was sent by Queen Helena of Edessa.
Yeah, I know that story.
And so it's quite obvious that Agabus is actually King Abgarus. That is the king of Edessa. He gets a mention within Acts of the Apostles. So Agabus is the king of Edessa, Agbarus. And he gives famine relief money to Judea. Now, that famine relief money was taken to Judea by Saul and Barnabas. It's quite clear that Saul and Barnabas were the ambassadors of Edessa. So the Antioch they keep talking about over in northern Syria was not Antioch Orontes, it was Antioch Edessa, because the name of Edessa was Antioch. And so when we have these disciples going backwards.
Agabus just is a random character in Acts who's a prophet.
No, he's not. No, not according to Professor Robert Eisenman. He says he's King Abgarus. It's quite obvious because it's the same story and the same name. And of course, Agabus means locust. We come back to the locust monarchy again. They're always being called locusts. The same as Kamsa, Bar Kamsa, the locust. Every time you come across the locust, you've got to start wondering if they're talking about Edessa. Same when they call them Arabs.
Talking though, all this secret talking though, it implies that somebody is deriving a message here, but when you actually look into what these things are, it doesn't even make sense, because what's the point of creating a myth that demonizes themselves if they secretly want you to worship? Like if it's about them, but it's really about the other people, it doesn't make any sense. It goes against each other, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Well, not really, because this religion already existed. It was already powerful at the time that it started being used.
Yeah, but you said it was created by them to begin with.
Well, it was created in the AD 50s, and then it was adapted by Saul Josephus to work for Rome after the Jewish revolt, because they wanted to neuter Messianic Judaism.
All right. Well, I'm not.
So it was an already existing. It was an already existing religion, and it was far easier to use it. And I'm just looking up this. I'm looking up the story of King Aretas, because again, I'll just have to give it to you because I can't find the actual quotes. But anyway, with the death of John the Baptist, we get the story from Josephus Flavius, and we get the story from the Gospels, of course. They both give the same story about the death of John the Baptist. And this was due to a marriage, because Tetrarch Antipas divorced his wife to marry Herodias. And the wife he divorced was the daughter of the king of Petra, King Aretas. So King Aretas was not very happy with this, and he sent an army to go and punish Herod Antipas. And according to Josephus, they were joined by some fugitives from Syria, and between them they defeated Herod Antipas. And that's the story we get. And because of this marriage, of course, John the Baptist was beheaded. And that's only the story that Josephus will give you, so you don't know the full story. The army of Aretas was joined by some fugitives. But when you read the Syriac historians, they give the same story, but they say that Aretas's army was joined by the Edessan army, and between the two of them, they defeated Herod Antipas. And so now you know what Josephus is doing. Where he comes across anything to do with Edessa, he just deletes their name from history, and so he calls them fugitives from Syria.
Why?
And yet Joseph, well, because he knew exactly who these people were, but he was told by Vespasian never to mention Edessa.
But we have other people mentioning them in history. We have Josephus mentioning them in his own history. About he said Josephus is told never to mention Edessa, but he does mention Edessa.
No, he doesn't.
He mentions them in his own book.
No, he doesn't. Not once. Look it up.
What? He's got a whole. He's got
Edessa is never mentioned. Never ever mentioned.
He talks about King Asessi. He talks about King Helena.
Yes, of Adiabene. Yes,
Yeah.
of Adiabene.
Yeah,
He's changed the name. Unless you know,
what's the point? They're still in there though. What does it matter?
Because nobody knows they're linked to Edessa. And even now, when I think I was the first person ever to say that Adiabene was Edessa, and you would not believe how many people came out of the woodwork to say I am wrong, and I was clinically insane. One of these people said.
They're two different places. Edessa's a city.
Yes, and Adiabene was supposed to be a city as well, or at least
it's a country.
Well, no, it was supposed to be Arbela. Was supposed to be called Adiabene.
Adiabene,
but it doesn't exist. It's not in the historical record. Again, you're following these other people who deny that that Edessa is Adiabene, and of course, Josephus never mentions Edessa.
Adiabene is a country that consists of Nineveh, Nisibis, Arbela.
Oh, that's what they say. You're looking up Wiki again.
No, this isn't any history book. This isn't any history book. I mean, even Josephus, who
it's not a country because it was deep in Parthia. At the very most, it was a city-state. Beni can mean a city-state. It's Aramaic, meaning a city-state. So Adiabene can mean the city-state of Adia, but it also can mean the sons of Adia, as in the sons of Adai, in the doctrine of Adai. But it couldn't have been a country because it was in Parthia. It was ruled by the Parthians, so they were the most powerful people in that region at that time. So at the very least, it was a city-state. But we know that Adiabene was Edessa because the queen of Adiabene was married to the king of Edessa.
That doesn't mean
everyone,
though.
Everyone has ignored that for the last 200-300 years until I started mentioning it. And then suddenly there was this great uproar with everyone saying, no, Adiabene cannot be Edessa. And suddenly a lot of people have come across to the idea that actually it makes a lot of sense if Adiabene is Edessa.
Pliny the Elder is a geographer who talks about this entire region. I'm going to give you the text right now and read it to you.
Yeah.
He mentions these are separate places. Edessa is a little more to the west. It's a city. Adiabene is a country, a little bit more in the east, closer to Armenia and that sort of area, sort of towards.
Yeah, but he doesn't call it Adiabene. He calls it something else. I mention this in my books. I go through it.
You say Edessa is never mentioned in history by anybody.
In the works of Josephus, I said. The works of Josephus. For listeners out there, you can do a quick search. If you get the text of Antiquities or Jewish War from Josephus, you can do a word search and you can look for Edessa and you can look for Abgarus and you can look for Manu, the kings of Edessa, and they are not mentioned in the works of Josephus. They are just simply not mentioned.
What do you mean? They're mentioned. He does mention these kings, though.
He mentions Adiabene. He never mentions Edessa, and he never mentions the kings. He never mentions. He never mentions Abgarus. He never mentions Manu.
Because that's later. Or I mean,
no, that's the time of the Jewish revolt. The king at the time of the Jewish revolt was called Manu, and never gets a mention. He calls them Monobazus.
Yeah, but he still
Monobazus.
The whole point of it, what I'm saying is, he still mentions Azatis. Why would he? You told me he was told not to mention Azatis at all.
Yeah, but his name in his that's my conflated name. You're using my conflated name. His name in Edessa was Manu. But his name when he was in Adiabene, mentioned by Josephus, was Izates or Isis. But we know that's an Edessan name.
I still haven't found Isis anywhere, but
yeah, of course you won't. Oh, what you mean Isis within the Greek? Well, I'll give you that later. It's going to take you much too long to find it.
Well, that's kind of funny. But what was I going to say? So yeah, Pliny the Elder is a geographer in the 1st century.
Yes.
Who mentions the city of Edessa and the country of Adiabene. They're two different places.
Yeah, Josephus doesn't, though. We were talking about Josephus. Josephus has deleted them from history.
But how does he delete them from history if other historians know who they are?
Well, it was a famous place. I mean, he can't control everybody. And he's mentioned that they're mentioned, of course, in the works of the Syriac kings, chroniclers, because the Syriacs were totally divorced from what was going on in Rome. They were shut off behind the Council of Chalcedon and behind the Iron Curtain of Islam. And so Rome had no control whatsoever about what they were saying about Edessa. And if it wasn't for the Syriac historians, we would not know that Adiabene was Edessa, because it's only from the Syriacs that we get the link between the two. From the works of Josephus, we would know is that Adiabene.
Works of the Syriacs. What do they say?
They say that Queen Helena of Adiabene was married to King Abgarus of Edessa.
Okay,
that's where we get the link from.
But that's two different people in two different places that are married.
You've got that. There is no archaeological evidence for Adiabene. People have been searching for it forever. Nobody has found any evidence for Adiabene whatsoever.
About? It's a region. I can
look
it up right now. Look it up, and you can look it up on Google.
Yeah, we don't go by Google when we're doing this research. There is no archaeological evidence for Adiabene in that region whatsoever. It's been assumed that it is Arbela, but there is no evidence.
Because it's a region. It's made up. It's imaginary lines. It's not really a place. It's a region.
It's Arbela. It's supposed to be Arbela, based on a city-state of Arbela.
Arbela is the capital of Adiabene.
Yeah, this was deep in Parthia. It's not going to be very big. You might at a pinch link this up with Hatra, which is next to Arbela, but that was a city-state. It was not a region. There are many links between the Edessans and the Hatrans, because the Hatrans used the same royal crown as the Edessans. And so there could well be links with Hatra. But at the very least, at the very most, all you're saying is there are cultural and royal links between Adiabene and Edessa. But their province was based upon Edessa more than it was Adiabene. Adiabene doesn't really exist. It's a manufactured name by Josephus. And what he's talking about is Edessa.
It's mentioned in Pliny the Elder too. It's mentioned in a bunch of different historians.
He uses a different name for it. If you look at it in the Latin that he was writing in, it's not actually called Adiabene. They've retranslated it. It's something similar, but it's not the same. But the point to be made is that Josephus never mentions Edessa. And that is what Rome obviously ordered him to do. So he never mentions Abgarus, even though Abgarus was a very influential monarch in this region, in this era. The only mention we get is
what you did is here's what happened. Here's the problem. You started off your inquiries linking Judea and Edessa as if they're one. This is all one place. Josephus is focused on the events that are happening in Israel and a little bit of Rome, and Egypt, but mostly Israel. That's his main subject. He's not going to talk
all about Parthia. He talks about he gives us the whole history of Thea Musa Aurania.
If it's relevant to the story, he does, and that's what I'm saying. He gives us
the whole history of the Parthian kings.
I mean, not the whole history. That's not true at all. There's a lot of history he does not write about the Parthian kings. He gives very little about the Parthian kings.
He gives us the history where it relates to Adiabene.
That's what I'm saying. He tells us he tells us what if it's relative, but he's not gonna. You're not gonna get everything. You're not gonna get Edessa. It's just a city. Agbaris, if it's not relative to the story, you're gonna get the mentions of the kings that are relative to what happened in the events of Israel. He's writing a history of Israel.
But we know that these monarchs. We know these monarchs were central to the gospel story. That's why this guy is in Acts of the Apostles, where he's
the whole point. You already assumed that.
No, I didn't assume that. That came much later. I wrote 2 books before I actually got to that stage. I didn't even know
the Gospels just flat out say this is who it is. It doesn't make any sense. Like, what's the point? What's the point of coding everything? What's the point of that?
Because Vespasian didn't want anyone to mention Edessa. They are a taboo nation. He didn't want anyone glorifying a city that had started a Jewish revolt against Rome. A very, very bitter and deadly revolt against Rome. And so he said, basically, you can't mention Edessa or the Edessian royalty. They are the non-royalty. and they've been deleted from the works of Josephus. And so everything that they had to write about, if you wanted to mention them, because they were important in this story. I mean, they caused the revolt in the first place, so it's very difficult to write a history of the Jewish revolt if you can't mention the main players. And so what did they do? They changed the names, and they called him the kings of Adiabene instead. They called him Monobazus. But quite clearly, Monobazus is just a bastardized Greek title meaning the only king. And who was the only king? It was the Jesus character.
Oh. Wait, so now Monobazus is Jesus, but so is Azatis, and so is Jesus Ben Gamala. They're all the same person somehow? I don't understand that.
Well, because they had multiple names. They weren't allowed to use the names Izati, the names Manu and Abgarus from Edessa, and so they used other titles. Monobazus is not a name; it's a title. It just means the only king.
Yeah, but his name is. Let me see. Let me just look this up real quick.
His name is Manu.
Monobazus. Monobazus the second. Fathered Izatis Bar. Okay. King. Yeah, it's Moonbaz. Munbaz. Moonbaz.
Yeah, he says that his name is Monobaz, called Monobazus. He gives them both names. So I mean, there's two names for a starters, and he says it in the same sentence.
Well, you also have to mention, you also have to factor in he's married into a king family, so it's like you're gonna we have a King Basilius in Greek. It's
Basileus. That just means king. It's right. It's not a name.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You have kings named Basil, and you have the kings who are born into king's family are oftentimes called king in their birth. Like that's.
Yeah, but that's not a name. It's just a title, isn't it?
But Basil is a name too. Basil is a name. It looks like a title.
Some titles can become names, but in general, that's just a title. But the main point, without getting too stuck in the weeds here, is that Josephus has deleted Edessa from his history, and yet he must have known that the entire history of the Edessan royal family, and the reason he's deleted them from history is because they started the Jewish revolt. Remember, the Jewish revolt was started by the kings and princes of Adiabene Edessa. They started the revolt when they.
You just said Adiabene and Edessa with the hyphen, but you're talking about a city and another region that's a little bit different away. Like they're not the same place.
It doesn't really matter. Josephus called them Adiabene
because they add up, and you just all of a sudden you have all this. I don't know.
Josephus was called them Adiabene, and I have said that they must be Edessa. Now you can call it Adiabene Edessa. We know what we're talking about. It's the region, the city that Josephus was not allowed to mention, so he calls it Adiabene. They started the Jewish revolt when they destroyed the legion of Cestius in AD 66. So they started the Jewish revolt. And then they surrendered to Titus at the end of the revolt in AD 70, when the kings Monobazus and Izates surrendered to Rome at the end of the Jewish revolt. So it's quite clear that these people led the Jewish revolt. There are some researchers who very bizarrely say that this means that they must have been allies.
No, it doesn't. Hold on a second. We have Parthian historians that don't say this, though. Their stories match up with Josephus.
No, Parthians didn't really have any history. There's no history that comes out of Parthia.
Yes, they do. Yes, you got Parthian historians. I can pull up one right. I got one right here. I got Fedorovsky has an entire history that goes back that far.
Yeah, and what does it say about Edessa?
It's the same thing that Josephus says. There's no what they don't have a motive behind hiding the fact that the revolt was by these kings of Edessa. They would just say that. Well, what are they just going to just lie too for no reason?
They're lying because they didn't want you to know who caused the Jewish revolt.
Parthians? Why would the Parthians care? You said the Romans would care. Why would the Parthians care?
So what are you saying that the Parthians are saying about the Jewish revolt?
There's no historians anywhere that have any alternative history that doesn't. If the Romans are lying, then their history wouldn't match up with other historians in other places.
They're not lying. They're just changing the name, so you don't know who started the Jewish revolt.
So you're saying the Parthians did the same thing? Why would they do that?
So what are you saying the Parthians say about the Jewish revolt? Who do they say started it?
Their history lines up almost. They don't say it was Edessa or Izates, or they say it was Nero sacking the temple and the Jews getting pissed off. The people in the temple. It was, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's not saying who actually started the revolt. The revolt started when the Legion of Cestius was destroyed in AD 66. It doesn't matter what the precursors were to it. That was the start of the revolt, is when they attacked Rome.
They don't say that it was the kings of Edessa that went against Rome because of the events in Jerusalem. They don't say that. No one says that.
Well, Josephus does. He says that the kings of Adiabene destroyed the Legion of Cestius.
Right. That's because they were already being invaded. This is already when the wars started. They're already being invaded.
No, the war hadn't started at that point. That was the very start of the war, when they attacked Rome.
Galilean wars you're talking about.
Sorry?
You're talking about in the Galilee.
No, long before Vespasian got there, the first thing that happened was they attacked Herodium, which was the arsenal of the Herodians, and so they stole all of the weapons. And the second thing they did is they used those weapons to destroy the legion of Cestius, who was the Syrian Roman commander, and they destroyed his legion.
Right.
And that was the start of the Jewish revolt.
Who did that, though?
The kings and princes of Adiabene.
And okay, so
Kenadius.
Right, but that's not what you're talking about.
It was Monobazus and Kenadius that started it.
In Jerusalem, you're talking about.
Yeah, in Jerusalem.
Let me see. I just want to see if this is what happened, because I know you're saying that the revolt that started in Jerusalem was from the king of Edessa.
Yeah, Josephus says the most valiant in the battle against Cestius were the kinsmen of Monobazus, the king of Adiabene.
I know that part, but
and their names were called Monobazus and Kenadius.
But
they were the kings and princes of Adiabene, and now we know that Adiabene is actually Edessa. At the very least, they're intimately linked provinces, but I say that they are actually one.
I'm fine with them being linked, but to say that they're one is like saying Seattle is California. So
it doesn't actually matter a great deal to the story whether they were just linked or whether they were actually one. But the primary and the richest and the most influential of these locations was quite obviously Edessa. And then when they surrendered to Rome at the end of the Jewish revolt, it says that on the same day it was that the sons and brethren of King Izates besought Caesar to give them his right hand for their security.
Sure, I know that part. I know that.
Yeah. So they were there at the beginning of the revolt. They were there and they surrendered at the end of the revolt. It's quite obvious that the monarchs, princes and kings,
they're not the main. It's not like they're the main subject of this. They're not like, it's not like a war from Nero against Adiabene. It's not what that is. They're going to the defense of the Jewish people, because that's who they align with.
No, they're actually fighting against the Jewish people. This was the whole problem with the revolt. The revolt from the perspective of the parable of the vineyard owner is that Edessa.
You can't use a parable to make your history.
Well, you can, because it sums up the entire revolt story very, very well. So it's a very good very good umbrella story to actually find out what was going on.
This was a parable.
This was a tax revolt against Rome, but the other problem was that Nero was on his last legs, and he died in AD 68. He was murdered or committed suicide in AD 68. So the throne of Rome was empty for whoever could get it. And 4 people threw their hat into the ring. This was the year of 4 emperors.
I know,
where 4 people tried to become the emperor of Rome.
Okay,
and what I'm saying,
first you get Galba, he gets turned down by Otho, and then Otho gets turned down by Vitellius, and then while that's happening, Vespasian's still in the east, and all the eastern provinces proclaim him as to go back and take what's his.
So what is happening here is that this revolt in the east has nothing to do with Judea. This was a battle for the throne of Rome. Whoever won this battle between Vespasian and the kings of Edessa, Adiabene and Edessa, would become the next emperor of Rome. This is what this battle was all about.
That's impossible. That's impossible.
This is why Jesus was crucified.
Impossible. There's no way. Let's say, for example, King Izates somehow defeated Vespasian in the battle in the east. Do you think that Roman senators are going to say, this guy, this Parthian guy, this Armenian guy is our king now? Is going to
they did in 220 AD, so why not then?
No, that was when they already had an entire prefect in the east. They already had government over there.
Rome was open for whoever could get it.
The legions would have to align themselves with the king.
And Jesus character had his own legion. I mean, that's what the 5,000 in the wilderness was all about. That was his legion, and he was giving them instruction as to what was happening before moving on Jerusalem.
Back to my point in the beginning of the show when I pulled up Asessi, the Ankh, and Merits and all that. I could easily go to the parables and read the parables and then just apply it to Asessi and say, look, he did this and so did this.
You will not get as many links as this, I can tell you.
I could probably get more.
Why was Jesus crucified wearing a crown of thorns and a purple cloak?
Because he's a mock king. They're mocking him.
Precisely, he's a mock emperor of Rome. The purple cloak was the symbol of the emperor, not of the king. It was a symbol of the emperor of Rome. And so quite obviously they were mocking him as a pretender to the throne of Rome. That's what this was all about. It was nothing to do with Judea. He wanted to take over the throne of Rome.
But it still doesn't make sense of why they would make a religion based off this fake history.
Well, we've been through that, but the reason he was wearing a crown of thorns is because the crown of thorns was the traditional crown of the Edessan kings. They all wore a crown of thorns. All of this history...
Based off what?
Based off their coins.
Based off a coin that has a crown that has it looks like every other crown?
No, it's got thorns all over it.
No,
and it's plaited. It's a plaited crown. If you look at it, it's plaited. Well, and that's exactly what they...
This coin. So,
sorry?
Do you realize a crown... Okay, I can pull out a coin of a king, and it looks like they have a crown of thorns on because there's pointy, whatever you want to call it. Like, do you want me to pull that up for you and show you a different version of that?
And plaited as well?
Yeah. Look at this. Coin of, I don't know. First of all, let's look at the coin you're talking about. Which coin is it?
Coin of it's one on the front of my book. It's my coin, in fact.
Izates?
No, it's of Abgarus.
I think I just found.
This is a later Abgarus. Abgarus,
Abgarus is the same guy too?
No, that was the father.
You're just saying because this crown looks pointy, it must be a crown of thorns.
They all wore the same crown for 200 years. They wore the same crown.
Yeah, but where in any history books does it say they wore crowns of thorns?
It's on their coins. You can see it.
But you're just literally saying it looks like thorns.
Because it does look like thorns. Anyone looking at it would say that's a crown of thorns. Now, what those thorns are, we don't know because they're not.
But look at this. Okay, but here's the thing: a crown,
and it's plaited.
The way it's drawn out, it's not. This is like the artist would have to just put little spikes on there for a diadem. There's other crowns that look like.
It's a crown of thorns. It's a crown of thorns. Yeah, I mean, some of the Greeks used to wear crown of thorns.
You can't say that it is, though. It just looks like a crown.
It looks like a crown of thorns. And of course, but whoever says it's a crown of brambles? I mean, the Catholic Church has just made that up completely. Nowhere does it say it's a crown of brambles, but in every cathedral, you'll see a crown of brambles, but that's not what it says.
All right, hey, check this out. I got another one look at this. So here's another one. This is Constantine. Look at this. I mean, when you draw a crown on a coin, it's going to come out this way because look, is that a crown of thorns too?
No, that's Sol Invictus. We know what that looks. Oh, you mean on the head of the king? No, that's laurel leaves. That's not crowns at all. That's laurel leaves.
Well, what I'm saying is that when you draw a crown on somebody's head, it's going to look like pointy. So you
No, there's much better ones than that. I mean, there are some kings who had the crown of Sol Invictus, and therefore they have sun rays coming out of their head. But this is a matter of just tying up all of the loose ends in this story. And all of the little pieces of the jigsaw puzzle fit into place. So I'm saying that the kings of Edessa were
drawing your own puzzle pieces and putting them in there. That's what.
No, this is exactly what it says. So
it's not exactly.
I ended up. Remember, I didn't start saying this. I started with a book about Queen Helena, nothing to do with the Jesus character. This just came out of the woodwork. All of these little pieces of evidence, and one of those little pieces of evidence is that the kings of Edessa wore a crown of thorns. It's not the whole story, but it's one little more piece of the evidence that goes in to make up the jigsaw puzzle. And it has relevance to this because it means that this dispute that the Edessan Adiabene kings were having with Rome was something to do with taking over the throne of Rome, because the throne of Rome was empty. And I'm sure that if Vespasian had lost this war against the kings of Adiabene Edessa, that he would have sailed. The king of Edessa would have sailed to Rome to become the next emperor, just the same as Emperor Elagabalus sailed to Rome to become the next emperor.
They would have fought him. He's not Latin. He's not even Greek. They would have fought him. They would have been he wouldn't just sail into Rome and just say, "I'm your king now." They would have fought his ass.
Emperor Elagabalus did exactly the same. He became the emperor. Queen Zenobia did exactly the same. Although she failed en route, Queen Zenobia did exactly the same. She was the queen of Palmyra, and she took over the Roman Empire, but she failed.
Well, they had a priesthood that was part of the Roman imperial cult. She had Pole already. Her son was a priest, and
so was Jesus a priest?
The kings of Adiabene. No. Stop. That's you can't just say that. This is real. We're talking about real people who have political pull in the Roman Empire. They have legions that legions that look up to them and want to fight for them. You can't just win a battle. You can't just win a battle against Rome. Take over Rome.
Rome was open to whoever had enough money to take over the throne. Right. And the Edessans were some of the richest people in the whole of the Roman Empire. This is why they say that Mary Boethus, who married Jesus of Gamala, was the richest woman in the East. She had more than enough money to buy her own army. That's what they did. And the 5,000 out in the wilderness that Jesus was teaching, that was his legion. That's why after the meeting was finished, he said, "Take up your cross and follow me." Why on earth would he be saying, "Take up your cross and follow me," before he was crucified? How was the cross being a symbol?
Because they're written after he was dead. And
now you're saying it's an interpolation, so you can have interpolations as well. Okay,
it was written that way.
It had nothing to do with that.
I didn't say it was interpolation. It's not interpolation. It's written after the fact, and the people writing these myths are keeping in mind.
We have 40 years of oral transmission. No, it was nothing to do with that. This was a Roman command. This was a command from a Roman army commander to his troops to start moving. They said, "Take up your cross and follow me," because the legionnaires, they all had a cross upon which they put all of their kit, and they took up their cross and they followed the army commander, the Roman army commander. That's what they did in Rome. It was a part of their military procedures. That's why he said it. Because the meeting on the Mount of the meeting on the Mount of Olives was another of these meetings with the army of the Jesus character. Because remember, in the biblical story, we get the Mount of Olives story with Jesus with his night meeting with his disciples, and they're disturbed by the Roman guard. Well, we have exactly the same story from Josephus Flavius, except that he says that the Egyptian false prophet, remember, he says it's the Egyptian false prophet who is the Jesus character, because it was the Egyptian false prophet who took the 5,000 out into the wilderness. The Egyptian false prophet was on the Mount of Olives with 30,000 armed men, but they were disturbed by the Roman guard and all of the men were chased away. It's the same story as the biblical story, but this is the secular story of the biblical story, where it's not just a few disciples on the Mount of Olives, it's 30,000 armed men, because he had his own army. And with 30,000 men, yes, he could have taken over the Roman Empire, but they just weren't trained as well as the Roman.
Speaking of Zenobia's son, Adenathus, here's his coin. I just want to show you his coin real quick. Is that a crown of thorns?
That's Sol Invictus again. That's the solar crown.
That's not really Sol Invictus. That's actually him on the coin.
Yeah, I know it is, but that's the solar crown. That's saying that he is.
But that's
that's different, isn't it? That is a plaited.
Let me just say this: if you had a historian or somebody in the time, or anybody writing about Adiabene and saying, they have a tradition of wearing crowns with thorns, and then we'd know that this is a crown of thorns. But all you're doing is you're looking at the coin and saying, oh, that looks like thorns. So it must be Jesus then.
Yeah. But this is only, for starters, that's what the editors and the chroniclers would say, because they don't want to admit it's a royal coin, because that was part of the taboo. You're not allowed to say that the Jesus character is a royal character. He has to be a pauper Prince of Peace. So why is he wearing a royal crown? So they had to disguise it and say it's something else. It's a crown of thorns. It's not a real royal crown. So that's one reason for doing it. And this is only one little piece of the jigsaw. I'm not hanging the whole of my story.
Somebody would be saying this. Somebody would be leaking this out. Somebody would be like, this is religion is false. It's based on this X, Y, and Z.
Well, of course they did. That was the whole history of the Knights Templar. That's what the Knights Templar were about. I don't
even want to go there, Ralph. But listen,
no, we have evidence. This is not plucked out of nowhere. We have evidence for it.
Okay,
where did the first crusade go to?
Edessa. Let me ask you this.
Precisely. Why did they go to Edessa?
Because that's Anatolia. They're coming from that area. It's the first city.
No, they were supposed to go to Jerusalem to free Jerusalem from the Muslims.
Constantinople, through Anatolia, then down to Jerusalem.
Edessa is nowhere near it. Edessa is in Mesopotamia. You've got to go across the Euphrates to get to Edessa. Why did the first crusade?
They have a Christian population there.
Why did the first crusade go to Edessa?
There's a Christian population there.
But their whole rationale was to free Jerusalem. It's quite obvious that they knew that Edessa was central to this story.
But you can't just go straight there. You have to make stops. You have to pick up your troops.
Edessa's nowhere near on track for going to Jerusalem.
If you go through Anatolia, through Anatolia, you got to go through Syria, and Edessa's on the way. They came from over here, Istanbul.
Yeah,
and they went down to Edessa.
If you're going down to if you're going to Jerusalem, you'd go down the coastline.
Oh no,
you wouldn't go out into the desert.
Outside where you have supplies and people who are trying to unlock that area. They wanted to free Edessa. There's a Christian population there. It makes sense that they would go there.
The supplies are on the coast because you can supply yourself by ship. You would never go away from the coast because then you wouldn't have any supplies.
No, that's not true. What's the reason why
you would go down via Beirut? That's where you would go. They went across the Euphrates.
They have roads that go from Constantinople to Edessa, and that's what they took.
For no good reason. They went there because they knew that Edessa was central to this story. Why was it central to this story?
So what are you saying they're doing there? There's a secret message to hide your story that no one knows about that's secret? How did they know about it?
They had been banned from going there for ever since the Council of Chalcedon, I suppose. So they've been banned from going there for about 700 years or more. Especially after the Iron Curtain of Islam, which was in the 7th century. Nobody could go to the east. It was not possible. And so the first place they wanted to go to, if they had known anything about this story, and they wanted to find any genealogies, any texts, any books, any histories of what happened during the Gospel era, there's no point going to Jerusalem. You want to go to Edessa because that's where the story is centered.
Who knows this, though? Who knows this? The Pope?
Baldwin of Boulogne, because a lot of these traditions ended up in France. You know the story of Mary Magdalene going to France. That is quite possible. There's quite a lot of circumstantial evidence to say that Mary Magdalene...
They're going to find a real chalice? Is this some real thing?
No, they're going to go there to find a bloodline, aren't they? They want to know who this guy was. You've got to remember that the Jesus character was at that time was the central political religious character in the whole of Europe, that dominated the politics and the power of everybody within Europe. You know,
Okay.
the Catholic popes were the most powerful people.
Whatever.
If you wanted any information about what had happened, especially as now we're coming up to the Renaissance sort of era, if you wanted any real information as to what happened, you need to go to Edessa. And of course, only about 10 years after they went to Edessa, we had the formation of the Knights Templar. And the Knights Templar were formed in order to hold secrets. And we don't know what secrets they held. Now, what sort of secret might you hold as a religious body that would make the Catholic Church afraid of you? This wasn't monetary. I don't think this was anything to do with treasure. This was probably secrets about the Catholic Church itself, that it was based on a lie, that Jesus was a warrior king and not a pauper prince of peace, and he was a king of Edessa, Adiabene and Edessa, if you want.
And people know this, but no one's going to talk about it. It's just going to stay secret until Ralph Ellis comes around. That's what you're saying.
This was known by the Templars, but it was lost, of course, because all the Templars were killed on October the 13th, 1307. That's why October the 13th, the number 13, is unlucky for some, Friday the 13th. This was such powerful.
Because that's a Pythagorean. That was a Neo-Pythagorean thing.
No, it came from the demise of the Templars. Friday the 13th is unlucky for some because the Templars were all killed on Friday, October the 13th, 1307, at 6 o'clock in the morning. This is well known within Masonic history, of course, that this is all embodied in all of these phrases that we use in the modern era, and most people don't know where they came from. But that was how powerful this information was. Whatever this information was that was so powerful, the Catholic Church had to destroy them. And of course, a lot of that information would have been destroyed at that time. And it's very difficult to get that information back again once it's destroyed, because a lot of it would have been oral. It was very difficult to write this information down. It was heretical. And that is why I say that Arthurian legend was written, because as you know, the Arthurian legend, in my view, is a copy of the gospel story.
But
and so King Arthur...
Why create a story based on 4 different people with 4 different names and 4 different stories from 4 different cities, or maybe even more? I mean, how many people do you think are historical Jesus? How many people equal Jesus?
Well, he was only one person, but he had 4 or 5 names. I mean, that's a different thing.
No. Jesus ben Gamaliel is not the same as Izates. He's not the same.
Yes, he is. Yes. He was one of the Babylonian Jews.
Nobody's saying that.
But they both came out of Babylon at the same time.
So
they are linked.
That doesn't make them the same person.
But it could make them the same person. They have a very similar history.
It could. That's such a big stretch, though.
No.
But why have so many different characters who are doing?
Because they weren't allowed to name the names of these people because their names were taboo. Vespasian didn't want anyone to mention them. These were the leaders of the Jewish revolt.
But yet he still does. He still mentions
in code.
Ben Gamaliel is not a code.
Well, it was if it was based on Karma, which was the name of the Edessan kings.
You still have he's still mentioning all these characters in the same story. And you're saying
no, it's a hidden story because they changed the names. It's like the fugitives in the record of Josephus Flavius, where he refers to fugitives from Syria. And we don't know who those people are unless you read the Syriac historians, and then we find that they are the army of Edessa. They're in code. They've been hidden. You know nothing about them. If it wasn't for the Syriac historians, we would have no idea that it was the Edessan army that joined with Aretas in order to defeat the...
before, and you didn't have an answer to this. There is other historians outside of the Roman Empire who have similar accounts to Josephus.
No. What about the Jewish revolt? No, they don't.
They're not saying that there's some secret king that was really like crucified.
These were well-known kings who were very powerful, probably the most powerful kings in that region.
Let's just cut to the chase. We'll go to super chats. Who created Christianity?
Sorry?
Who created Christianity?
Saul Josephus.
Okay, when?
Well, essentially in AD 52 when he went, AD 55 when he went on his second tour of the Mediterranean, because he got the
and then he went to war after that against Vespasian, because he goes,
yeah,
you know, he goes to war against Vespasian.
he was fighting against this. Remember the history of Josephus Flavius, because I say these two people are the same. We can go into that if you want.
No,
Josephus Flavius went to Rome. He saw Nero. He came back from Rome, and he became the army commander working for the Jewish priesthood in Galilee. He was the army commander in charge of Galilee.
So before
and
this,
his task at that time.
Let me just. We take one point at a time. And you're saying before all that, he's writing these epistles about Jesus Christ, because that's what Paul.
Because he was a famous king. He was the king of that era. So he was writing about this person who was effectively his king, because
he's saying that Isatis, who's secretly Jesus, is born in Bethlehem.
He wasn't born in Bethlehem.
Well, the story, the Gospels that you say are still written by the same people.
If anything, he was born in Bethania. You've got to remember that many of these Gospels have different names for these regions. And quite often, Bethany is called Bethania. And it's a place across the Jordan. So that there are lots of...
It just happens to be a name similar to the one of King David, Bethlehem, and they're saying that, and you fulfill a prophecy. Is this some real thing happening? Like, I'm not understanding. You're making the history real, and you're taking the myths, and you're making the history as in code, and then you're taking the myth and turning it into coded history. That's what you're basically doing here. That doesn't make sense, though. It doesn't.
Well, it does make sense, because all of the pieces fit together. If we go back to Josephus...
But if you draw your own pieces, you can make any puzzle piece fit together.
No, these are pieces that come straight out of Josephus. I'm not all I'm doing is changing the names.
Josephus has one different character for Jesus ben Gamala. He has another character for Isatis. There are two different people. He even has Jesus himself twice in his writings.
He's one person with two names. Their stories are identical.
But why?
Josephus, when he was writing these texts, he had information... He had information coming in from all over the empire, and he was stitching this together, and you'll find there's a lot of duplications. But Josephus was the army commander in charge of Galilee from AD 66 onwards, and he was fighting Jesus. That was what he was doing. This is why you get in Acts of the Apostles, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Because that's what Josephus Flavius was doing. He was fighting Jesus in Gamala.
And then
in the AD 60s.
Worship him after?
Sorry?
And then he decides to worship him after this? Why?
No, he then changed to the Romans. So in the historical story,
why would he create a religion that worships this guy secretly?
Because he was doing that in the AD 50s, because the Jesus character would have been the king of Edessa, or at least his brother would at that time.
Why would he still do it, though? If he just fought a war against them and he's dead, and he's not really a king of kings, he's not really the Messiah, why even have a religion still keep going?
Because if you remember, on his second tour of the Mediterranean, it's quite obvious that he was trying to become the Messiah himself, but they wouldn't accept it, and he got stoned. So he accepted the fact that
another Messiah, and then he just goes with that, and it works?
People knew of this king, and so he venerated this king. But
they don't know it's a king. They think it's Jesus from Nazareth, a poor guy who's a prophet, basically. They don't think.
No, that wasn't crafted. That wasn't crafted until later. That would have been in the AD 70s. So in the AD 60s,
that's what I'm saying. When you get to the point around the 70s, when the war is over and they're creating the Gospels, why? What's the point?
Because this religion was already influential throughout the whole of the Roman Empire. It was
in the 70s. In the 70s, can you name one person in the history of a Roman Empire who mentions Christianity in the 70s?
The epistles, all of those communities throughout the epistles. It was widespread throughout Anatolia and Greece via the epistles. There were communities all over the Roman Empire who were believing in this simple Judaism.
I don't think
Judaism for Gentiles. But going back to Josephus, he was He was the army commander in charge of Galilee in the AD 60s, and he was persecuting Jesus around Galilee in the AD 60s. This is exactly what he says in his books.
And then he
But
dies.
then,
And then, according to you, he dies on a cross. He's one of them. Josephus.
no, before that, he changes to the Romans. So we haven't got there yet.
Okay, so why would that turn into, I'm going to make a fake religion based off this guy who
Religion was already there. The religion was there from the AD 50s.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm talking about the Gospels. Why even do it? Why even go through with that? It sounds so crazy to make a religion based off a guy who has 4 different code names, and you're going to turn him into the son of God and make a religion based off him after you just defeated him in a war.
Rome wanted a way of neutering Messianic Judaism, and if that meant having
why use that?
Why use any method? That was the method they chose because Joseph.
If you like, even a mythicist can just say they just made it up. They don't have to have secret codes of a king they killed.
Yeah, but we have a history that is identical to the story they crafted. So Josephus had this religion in his pocket already, and it was much easier.
How is it identical? How is it identical?
Well, have you read the Jewish Revolt? It's exactly the same as the gospel story.
What? I don't know about
Jesus.
That.
Well, it is, because we have the crucifixion. The crucifixion is told to us by Josephus.
You even admitted that you have the letters of Josephus or Paul before the events of the Jewish war,
which don't mention the full crucifixion story. They just have odd words cast into this story.
Why mention the crucifixion at all? Why even mention a crucifixion?
What, in the epistles?
It didn't even happen yet, so why even mention a crucifixion at all? Doesn't matter.
They're interpolations. If you read them, they're little little words tacked on to the end of verses, which are nothing to do with the actual verse itself.
What do you mean?
There is no. Well, we're going back over this because we've already been through this, but there is no crucifixion story whatsoever.
Whatever. Yeah. All right. You know what?
Within the epistles.
I want to say this though, Ralph. I do like you, Ralph. I like your books. They're very interesting. They're creative. You know, they're very creative. You're a creative thinker. You know, you should. I don't want to have any bad. I just want to. Because I'm honestly, I'm not sold by it. And yeah, obviously you can tell I'm not sold by it. But I just wanted to have this conversation. Maybe I want to see. Maybe you could convince me. Maybe there's too many roadblocks in the way when I'm trying to understand what you're saying. I have to.
If you want to understand what I'm saying, you have to be quiet for a little bit and let me give you the story and then come back. If you interrupt all the time, I can't tell you what the story is.
Because the way you tell your story is we have to assume this is Jesus. Then based off this, we assume this. And based off this, we assume. I have to stop you at once in a while and say, wait a minute, how do we know this? And we don't. And then it's always, I just assumed it because it looks like this, or this looks like a crown of thorns, or the name sounds kind of similar. It's like, I can't build.
They are all pieces of the puzzle. And you've got to remember that I didn't start with the Jesus character. This is where I ended up after 4 books.
Yeah.
And it ended up with looking at Edessa. I didn't even know.
I'm not calling you a liar. I'm just saying that's what you think. And
but all of the pieces link together and they make a cohesive picture. And so we have, I don't know how many pieces of evidence I've got in those books.
Back to the beginning of this video when I mentioned Asessi, the Pharaoh, I can make all those pieces fit. I can make Jesus.
I bet you haven't got 300 pieces of evidence that they are the biblical Jesus.
If I really wanted to, I could make that.
Oh, I'm sure.
Easily. You have a Mary, you have a Peter, you have a Jesus, and you have a funerary cult that talks about him living after he's gone. You have a lot more pieces there than you do with Azates, who's just some random king in Syria.
He's not a random king. He's not a random king. This is what I'm trying to tell you, but you won't listen, that Edessa was central to this story, that Saul was an ambassador of Edessa, and you won't even accept that. Why do you think Saul was called a tent maker?
That. No one ever mentions that. You just
because it goes against the Christian narrative. If you're a Christian, you cannot take what I've said.
No, but here's what I'm saying. If Paul really was that title, other people would know this. It would have been leaked out in other places. You can't just delete things from history because you want to. The truth
you can if the Saul character was.
There's ways to rebuild the past and look at things, and there's ways to and it sometimes it's a lot more simple than you think. It's not always
If
coded.
Saul was the last man standing in Judea after the Jewish revolt, he could delete everything he wanted. And
No,
that's what he
can't.
did, because he deleted the works by
He's not the
Justus of
last person. He's
Tiberius.
not literally the last person standing. There's still
No, well, he was.
thousands of people living there.
Josephus says 2 million people were exiled into the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
There was a
You think
huge
a lot of those
exodus
people will
after this
remember the
time.
history? You think a lot of those people would know what's going on?
The books of Justus of Tiberius all went missing. We could have had this history from Justus of Tiberius, but of course those books have gone missing. Why did they go missing? Because Josephus Flavius hated them. And it's quite apparent that he would have deleted them if he had come across any text. So we're missing the other side of the story.
Okay.
All we get is Josephus, and we know Josephus is not exactly lying to us, but he's giving the Roman perspective. That's why he will not mention the kings and the monarchies of Edessa. They've been deleted from his works.
They're in
We
his
know that.
but they're in his
Time
works.
and time again.
They're in his
Where he could have mentioned
If they're
Edessa,
deleted
he
from his
doesn't.
works, then why does he mention Izates, or why does he mention any of them? Why does he mention
Because they were the leaders of the revolt. He couldn't completely delete
that's
them
the
from
whole
history.
point. That's the whole point.
No.
If you're going to delete them from history, well, you would delete the leaders, wouldn't you?
No, the point is that you don't know that these people were Edessan monarchs, and even now today
Yeah,
you're arguing against it because you have been taken in by Josephus's propaganda,
No, I
and
haven't.
you think that they all came from Adiabene.
Because Adiabene is not the
It
same
was
place.
it was the most successful propaganda ploy ever employed, and you're still believing it. Still to this day, you believe it.
No, it's not even close.
It's true. It's true.
No, but
Where have you gone?
wanted to delete them from history, why wouldn't you just completely take the whole story out? Why would you?
There you go. Sorry, I hit the wrong.
Oh, what are you still there? You still there?
Because as I say, we come back to the fact that Vespasian wanted. Am I on? Yes.
Yeah.
Vespasian wanted some way of neutering Messianic Judaism. What he hated was the Judaism of Jesus and James, who had started the revolt in Judea. And he wanted to neuter that Messianic Judaism, the Nazarene Judaism. And he would do that in any way he possibly could. And the way they chose, for whatever reason, and it was obviously quite successful, the way that the thing they chose was simple Judaism, the Judaism from Saul. And it worked perfectly. They hid the Jewish revolt. So even today, nobody seems to know why the Jewish revolt started. They keep denying that it was the king's.
Jewish revolt started. We know how the Jewish revolt started. We know Nero went in the temple, sent.
But you don't. Quite obviously, you are denying the role of the Adiabene Edessan monarchs.
Because they're not. It's not the reason why the revolt started.
Well, it was because they defeated the Legion of Cestius in AD 66. That was the revolt. Before that, it was just festering. Anything could have happened. But once they had taken the armory down at Herodium, which they did in early AD 66, and once they had attacked the Legion of Cestius, that was the start of the revolt.
Well, no, I don't think so, because the revolt actually started before that. It actually started at the temple area when they sacked the temple, and there was people, sending arrows and killing some Roman soldiers, and that was a no-no, and that's how it started.
I'll have to look that up, and I'm not sure which event you're talking about there. But I mean, there were many precursor events. I mean, we have the precursor event of Bar Kamsa, who gave the sacrificial calf to the high priest of Jerusalem. That was a precursor event. That was designed to fester the problem of Judea and start the revolt. But I would not say that is the start of the revolt. That was just a mechanism for starting it. The revolt didn't start until Rome was attacked, and it was attacked when they destroyed the Legion of Cestius. That was AD 66. And that was done by the kings and princes of Edessa, Adiabene, if you like. And that's been denied by historians. Even if you read it in many respected histories of the Jewish revolt, they tend to sideline completely the role of the Adiabene Edessan monarchs. And I'm not sure why,
But
even in
still,
this era, that they would do
like I
that
said
today.
10 times, and I'll say it again. Why even have them in the story to begin with if you're trying to delete them? It just doesn't make what you're saying is just not true. It's just objectively not true. They're in the story.
Because this was the story.
The only parts that
Everybody
deleted,
knew
the only
what had
parts that
happened.
they deleted are the parts that you're assuming happened that show up nowhere else in history. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
Everything
but
else is all there.
it's like trying to cover up the Iraq War or something like that. You can't really just delete it from history, but
Well, you
you
just said
can
they did.
change.
You just said they did.
Yeah, by changing the meaning of it.
It just doesn't make sense. It's so much work for just such a little thing, just to code
No,
this.
it was very, very successful. It was the most successful propaganda ploy
them.
in the history of humankind.
When you defeat somebody in battle, you brag about it. You don't secretly hide it.
No, because they had tried different methods before. They tried this with the Druids in Britain, and they were a bit more bullish when they destroyed the Druids, and they caused an uprising that destroyed 5 major Roman cities. There was complete mayhem within Britannia. This was only in the early AD 60s. This was in recent memory. And the last thing that Vespasian wanted to do was to create another uprising by annoying all of the people in the East.
But
and
they're still alive. They remember everything. They're not going to forget because he took it out of the history book. They're still alive.
He has taken it out of the history book, because even today, people don't know.
That's not even written until the 90s.
What? Yes, and why was that? Why do we have this 40 years of oral transmission?
There's no oral tradition. Josephus just wrote this thing in the 90s.
No, I'm talking about the Gospels. If you are saying that the Jesus character was crucified in AD 30, why could they not write about it for 40 years?
I don't know. I mean, like I said,
because it didn't happen in the AD 30s. It happened in AD 70. And so when they wrote the Gospels, they were writing immediately after these events. Well, that's why Jesus described the siege of Jerusalem. He described Jerusalem being surrounded by a wall and a trench. That is the siege of Jerusalem. It comes out of the works of Josephus. That's why Jesus lamented the death of Zacharias between the temple and the altar.
At the end of the day, it just you're trying to say that they created a religion based off a person they defeated in war, and they made him the Messiah and their God. Like, it sounds insane. It really does. It makes a lot more sense if Christianity was really a grassroots movement and it just spread slowly over time, which it actually looks like it does. Like, you hardly see it.
Not really. Remember, the Romans didn't want this religion for themselves. It didn't become a Roman religion for another 300 years. They wanted this religion just for the Jews. So they wanted to convert the Jews from Messianic Judaism into this simple Judaism. And that it was just it was a religion for them.
You already have Judaism movements that look like Christianity, that are not created by Romans. They were real, the Enochian type of Christianity. Or you have what's his name, the rabbi from the first century, from the early first century BC, actually, who says that the whole teaching of the Torah is to love your enemies. You have teachings that are like this, and this is not some like Romans came in and like turned Judaism on its head, and all the Jews were just all rebels who wanted to kill. It's not like that. Like, there are rebel movements, but there's also peaceful movements in Christianity.
And this was the most successful of them, and it was successful because it was Rome backed. Remember, the initial symbol of Christianity, long before the cross came in, the initial symbol of Christianity was the anchor and the dolphin. We have this from the catacombs in Rome and various other places where they used to use the symbol of the anchor and the dolphin. But you've got to remember that the anchor and the dolphin was the symbol of Vespasian. It was not the symbol of Christianity as we know it.
I'll look into that. I'm not sure if I know much about it.
Have a look at it.
But I do want to get to some super chats if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
All right, cool. John Maker, if it doesn't fit the narrative, it must be a latter interpolation. How to ad hoc 101.
Well, you can say that, yes, but if you read the epistles, nowhere in the epistles do we have the full crucifixion story. It's just not present. And yet you know that Saul, if he had been able to, would have been lamenting this story all across the Mediterranean.
Yeah, the next one is
What do
from...
I...
Oh, you know what? This one came first, but it's the same person. Did the Catholic Church make Eris a saint, possibly Saint Walpurgis? I have no idea. Do you know that?
No, I don't know either.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's relevant.
Yeah, let's go to the next one. Wow, there's a lot of comments I have to go through. A lot of engagement. That's good, though. It's good, though.
Oh, yes, yeah. The more questions, the better.
Yeah.
We'll never get to the bottom of this if people don't question it.
No, and that's all. I'm not saying that you're, you know, I'm just really, I'm tough on a lot of people, especially Roman Providence people. I get like this. What does Ralph Ellis know about the Bible Black?
What do they mean by the Bible Black? Are they talking about the Black Jesus?
Maybe. I don't know if
well,
you can...
in my books, just to add some more petrol on the fire, I say that Jesus was ginger, of course, because if you look at the history of these monarchs from Ramesses II to Cleopatra, they were all ginger. Ramesses II was a white-skinned man with ginger hair. We have that from his visit to the Paris forensic labs when he was taken to Paris. And Cleopatra again was ginger. And I say that Jesus was ginger as well, because if you look at the Hakok mosaic of what they call the elephant mosaic or the calf mosaic that we were talking about, the king there is ginger. And he's quite obviously an Eastern king. He's a king because he has diadema in his hair. He's an Eastern king because he's dressed as a king of Edessa, sort of in Roman armor, but he also has stockings, which is an Edessan habit. And he is ginger. He's got long ginger
cap, right? Yeah. You got a point there.
He's got long ginger hair. And he's dressed in exactly the same fashion that I said the Jesus character would be. So the image on the front of my book, Jesus King of Edessa, I made that image 5 years before this mosaic was ever discovered. And then they discovered this mosaic, and lo and behold, it's exactly the same as the image I made on my book, exactly, which is another reason I said it was a king of Edessa.
Interesting.
Please list all of the names. Well, I mean, that one of the names, of course, is Jesus. Oh, it's the same name, Jesus of Gamala Sapphires. The other name is Esus. Oh, it's the same name. Remember, what I'm saying here is
I can name 20 different Jesuses in history, though.
Yeah, but they always say that Jesus was a very popular name because they are not realizing that many of these people were actually the biblical Jesus. What I'm saying is that Esus was the actual official name of the Jesus character. And the allusion that he was called Joshua was a later idea because they wanted him to be Jewish in some fashion. So they wanted him to have a Jewish name. It's like when I went to a kibbutz in Israel and they immediately wanted to call me by a Jewish name. They said, "What's your Jewish name?" Because Ralph is not a Jewish name. And so we used my second name, which is John, which is, well, it's not actually Jewish. I don't think it's only New Testament, but there we go. So I became John.
Well, I mean, I can literally go into the Talmud, or I can go into different texts, even the Old Testament. You have a Jesus ben Sirach, you have Jesus who's the high priest, and Zechariah.
Yeah, but that's a translation of Joshua.
That's what the name is.
Yeah, no, you see, I'm saying it's not.
In Hebrew, it's spelled exactly the same.
They linked it to Joshua because they wanted a name that sounded similar.
Yod, Shin, Ayin, Yod, Shin, Vav, Ayin. It goes, but Jesus, Joshua, Isus, whatever you wanted to do, it's all the same in Hebrew.
We don't have any Aramaic New Testaments. We only have the Greek one. And he wasn't called that in the Greek one. He's called Isus.
Right.
He wasn't called Joshua.
That's the name in Greek.
Yeah, I know you've made that link between the two. I'm saying that link doesn't exist.
In Greek. I-H-S, Isus. That's how you say it in Greek.
Isus, like Esus. Yes, it comes from Esus. The Greek comes from Esus. the Persian name, the Parthian name.
That's how you would translate Joshua into Greek.
No, they've said that because they want to link it up to the name of Jesus. I think that's a later transliteration because they wanted Jesus to be Jewish.
That's the name.
And therefore they linked it up to Joshua.
But the name means Yahweh's salvation. It's the same name.
No, it does in the Hebrew for any of the Hebrew characters, but that does not mean that the Jesus character had that name. His name was Jesus or Eusus in the Greek. It's not the same as Yeshua. I know that's difficult to grasp because they've made this link so strong between Yeshua.
No, that's not true. The name Yeshua is one of the highest names according to Philo. Everyone, this is a known thing. It's a name given to priests, and if you go to the Old Testament, it's spelled Yeshua in Hebrew. And when you get to Greek, it translates to Isus. The same name. Hold on, let me finish. The same name in the Septuagint that is Yeshua in Hebrew becomes Isus in Greek. It's the same name. That can demonstratable. Think about it. The name that's Yeshua in Hebrew, when you translate it into Greek, is Isus. The same name as Jesus in the Gospels. I can just I can show you that. You want me to show you?
Yeah, from the Septuagint. Yeah, probably.
So that's the name, though. That's the same name.
Yeah,
but they would know this in the first century if they're naming somebody Isus. They would know.
Yeah, but if he was Parthian, he did not have that name. They've made a link between that name.
Back to this again. We're assuming things before we even get there. That's how you fit.
We know that this was a name of this king of Adiabene and Edessa. His name was Isus. And if he
still haven't shown me that. If you could show me that, I would.
Well, I can't because it's going to take me 10 minutes to look it up. But I'll send you the link.
Of course, so I will. And if you send me the link, I will post it on my community tab.
Good.
He's right. I will. I'm not just gonna. But if you don't, it just looks like an L for you because you still have to show me that.
Yeah, of course. No, it's in my book. So it's just difficult to actually look it up because if I look up Isus in my book, I've got about 1,000 references. So it's very difficult to find the place in my book where I've mentioned
his name is Azati. That's his name. Even if his nickname is Isus, its name is Azati. Yes. Anyways, Mr. Monster says, besides for financial reasons, because the Templars had a lot of wealth, could they have also been murdered because they learned forbidden truth?
Yeah, but what was the forbidden truth that they knew? I'm saying that the forbidden truth that they held was the secular, historical account of the life of Jesus. Essentially, what I'm saying they had is they discovered my Jesus King of Edessa book. All of that information that's in my book, they discovered that when they went to Edessa. And that was heretical. And it was very difficult to hold on to that information. That's why I say that the Templars crafted Arthurian legend in order to hold that information. So in my Grail Cipher book, I say that King Arthur was actually the King Jesus character. And the life of King Arthur is the life of Jesus. And that was the only way of telling that story back in the Middle Ages. Because the story of Jesus as a warrior monarch from Edessa was completely heretical. And how could you tell that story to anyone? Well, easy. You change the names yet again. We get yet another name change. And you just say, the guy was called Arthur. And he was a king of Britannia. And he was fighting the Romans. Yeah, I know there were no Romans in Britannia at that time, but just pretend that he was fighting Romans, just the same as Jesus was fighting Romans during the Jewish revolt. And now you can tell that story. And in fact, now you can tell that story and mock the Catholic Church who don't know what you're talking about. It was the perfect solution to hold this information. And I think that's the information that the Knights Templar had. And that's why they had to be destroyed.
Mr. Monster returns and says, "If Jesus truly existed, then he definitely was Palestinian." Interesting.
No. Well, here's another contentious little piece of history for you. The Palestinians are not Palestinians, the modern Palestinians. They are invading Arabs. The original Palestinians were the Peleset, and they came from Macedonia. They were Greeks. They were Greek-speaking Macedonians. They were part of the Sea People invasion from 1100 odd BC, and they are the Palestinians. But when you can hear it in the name, the Peleset, the Philistines, the Palestinians. But when the Arab Muslims came into the region, in the 7th century AD, they destroyed all of the original Palestinians, and they stole their lands, and they stole their name as well. So the modern Palestinians are nothing to do with Palestine. They're invading Arabs in the 7th century.
Interesting. The next one is Quran calls Jesus like Isa.
Isa, yes.
Maybe Islam emerged from Nazarene thought. Some say Quran explains Jesus wasn't crucified.
Yeah, well, there is. They picked up a lot of this information because they call Christians over there the Nazrani, from the Nazarene. So they're using the original name for the Church of Jesus and James. They call them the Nazrani. And when I was over in Syria, I was actually told that the Nazrani can mean little fish as well, because Jesus was the first of the fisher kings. This is all to do with procession, of course. It's all to do with astrology and the procession of the equinox. So yeah, they picked up a lot of this information. They also picked up the information that maybe it wasn't Jesus that was crucified anyway. It was his twin brother, Judas, who was the guy who was crucified, possibly. That's what the Quran says, and that's what the Gospel of Barnabas says as well. In fact, that's what the Talmud says. The Talmud says that a likeness of Jesus was crucified, not Jesus himself.
Tiny Bones Man says Jacob supplants Esau. Eden means step. They're Indo-European. Adam means red. Adam is the same word as Edom. The serpent and Adam, Jacob and Esau. Interesting.
Yeah, well, Esau is the red, but again, we get this strand of redness that goes through the Old Testament. So Esau was red, and so was King David. He was red as well. What are they talking about? I think they're talking about the ginger monarchy, because Yuya was red as well. Yuya is the patriarch of the Amarna dynasty of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. He was ginger. Ramesses II was ginger. Ramesses the Great. Cleopatra was ginger. This is the ginger monarchy. And this is one of the reasons I think that Jesus was ginger. And of course, Bar Kamsa, the king that's displayed on the Hukok mosaic, he's ginger. He's very ginger. So yeah, I think this is what they're talking about when they're talking about the red or the ginger dynasty.
Well, that was the last one. You want to anything you want to talk about before we close this thing out? We've been doing it for 2.5 hours. But I've had fun. I don't know about you. I've had fun. Hopefully you had.
Yeah, it's been going on quite a while.
Hopefully I wasn't.
Yeah, it's well. Just to say to listeners that all of what I'm saying comes from the original text. So I'm not making any of this up. It comes from the original text. The only thing I really do is I put a different translation onto these texts. So that I step away, because I'm not a Christian, of course. I have no dog in this Christian fight. I can look at this with independent eyes. I don't need this to line up with the gospel story. So I can look at this with very fresh eyes and make up a fresh story about it. And the thing I like about my story is that it becomes predictive. It's predicted many things that were unknown before, especially in the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament. Things like the discussion between Joseph and Pharaoh in the Old Testament, which makes no sense at all. I make complete sense of that if you take it in cosmic astrological terms instead of talking about agriculture. So all of these things make sense of what was inexplicable. I mean, one of the inexplicable things is all of these people missing from the historical record. Jesus is missing, Saul is missing, all of the Old Testament characters are all missing from the historical record. But if you look at it logically, suddenly you can start to find these characters. And I think I've found the Saul character in Josephus. We've not really discussed that, but there's good reasons for thinking they are the same person. I found the Jesus character in the King Jesus character from Edessa, which nobody knew about before I started talking about Edessa. Nobody had talked about Edessa in gospel terms, and suddenly everyone is discussing Edessa. So at least we're getting halfway there. People are investigating, people are researching. That's good, because I don't have all of the information. I never could have all of the information. But if we can get 10, 20 eyes looking at this and researching into this, I'm sure we'll find some more information. So it's an interesting story that's developing. Even Jacob is now discussing. For people who don't know, Jacob is sort of my sort of nemesis.
Yeah.
But even now, he's discussing Edessa all the time, which is great, because now we're pulling Edessa out of the woodwork. We're discussing it, researching it, looking at the possibilities. And I think the more people start researching this topic, the more we will find that is linked to the gospel story. And this was the story they wanted to cover up. And Rome wanted to cover it up because they wanted to neuter, as I said, Messianic Judaism. The Catholic Church wanted to cover it up because the last thing they wanted you to know was their pauper Prince of Peace was actually a warrior monarch who came from Edessa and started a Jewish revolt against Rome. That was not the story they had been telling for the previous few hundred years. And so the last thing that they wanted was for anyone to mention Edessa. And so the whole of that history has been sidelined. You're not allowed to talk about it because it's heretical. So if you're Templar and you start talking about it, well, we'll destroy your entire organization. And it's time we started talking about it again. And hopefully we'll get to the bottom of this. Because even if I'm only sort of like 60% correct, I've still changed the entire story of the New Testament, and that's good. That's interesting.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't have a problem with the I respect you, Ralph. I think you write interesting books, and I hope the best. So I hope maybe you're right. Maybe you can convince some people some things, and maybe some archaeology might favor you. We'll see. That anything's possible.
That's already happened. Remember, I wrote my Edessa book 5 years before the Hakok mosaic was discovered. And yet the character in the Hakok mosaic is identical to the character on the front of my book. And then the archaeologist on site at Hakok, Jody Magnus, said that this is an image of Alexander the Great. And I'm looking at this thinking, you've got no idea what you're talking about, are you? This is Alexander the Great with a curly side lock of hair, a payot, a Jewish payot. So I wrote to her and said, are you saying that Alexander the Great was a Jew? And she had never heard of the story of Bar Kamsa from the Talmud, and that he was the leader of the Jewish revolt. He was responsible for the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem. That's what the Talmud says. And she had never heard of that story. And so it's down to me, heretical me, to point out to some of these people, that's what the story is that you're trying to uncover here. And so, yeah, I changed their entire story of what this mosaic was about, even if you don't think it's linked up to the Jesus character. It was from the Talmud. So yes, archaeology is coming out of the ground, which does support what I have said. So that's interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah, that's basically it for today. Oh, someone just popped up with the last second super chat. Absolutely fascinating and challenging. I look forward to more. Yeah,
glad you enjoyed it. Yes,
maybe next time we come out, we can do some Grail stuff.
I thought we were actually. I've got all this information.
Well, did you read that book that I told you to read with Jesse Weston?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, that's one that we should do a video about that. That's
the information I've got on my screen because I thought that's what we were going to talk about. So.
Oh well, I promise we'll do this again. And I won't be his opponent. I won't be an opponent. We'll work on something together, and maybe that could be it.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, and you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.